Hello and welcome to this tutorial on iZotope's Ozone 5 mastering plugin. Ozone's been around for many years, but this latest version, version 5, is simply the best version of Ozone that's ever been, and definitely worth an upgrade for those of you who are using previous versions. Ozone combines 7 processes in one, well 8 really, because there's 2 EQs now, which we'll cover. And there's enough clout in here to cover the most demanding mastering jobs. The interface has been simplified, and we'll be covering that in great detail in this tutorial because there are many options for each module. As you can see from just looking down here, there's equalizers, reverb, a harmonic exciter, a dynamics module, stereo imaging, a second equalizer, and finally the maximizer and dithering module. We will be covering all these in detail, so stay tuned for that. And also worth mentioning is that there are 2 versions of Ozone 5 available. The one we're going to be working on most of the time is this one, which is the basic Ozone 5, which is significantly cheaper than Ozone 5 Advanced, which we will certainly be looking at the back end of this tutorial, and I'll explain some of the benefits that you get with that more advanced version. And like many things in life, it's significantly more expensive in return for just a handful of additional features. And it's up to you to really think about whether those small amount of additional features are going to be worth the extra outlay, because they are the icing on an already very nice cake here. So we'll cover those additional features later on. Now, I suppose no introduction to a plugin of this standard would be complete without the usual warning that this is a powerful beast. Because while a plugin like this can yield absolutely brilliant results with the power held within, it can also yield significant damage. And as they say, mastering is part art and part science. This plugin probably takes care of most of the science, but the art is up to us. So all I can really say in anticipation of this is a very powerful beast. And I can't wait to dive into just how powerful it is in the next few videos. So please stay tuned, and next up, we'll start looking around the interface. Now we're going to have a basic tour around the Ozone 5 interface. Now I've already got an instance of Ozone 5 ready to go. If I click on it here, this is the basic look you're going to get when you first open Ozone. Now you can see here the interface is being dominated by this preset box, prompting us to choose a preset. Now that's great for people who are just starting out and you want that to be put in front of you so you've got a starting jump off point. But for me, I don't like this box jumping up all the time, because even if I choose a preset, it will continue to jump up all the time. So let's say I choose that preset, close that box, and I'm happy and I'm working away in Ozone. When I close Ozone and reopen it again, the preset box jumps in my face again. So in order to prevent this from happening, the first tip I'm going to give you right now is to get rid of this Show at Startup option. Take the X out of the box, and from now on that won't be the case. So now when we close Ozone and reopen it from here, just the interface comes back without the preset box. Of course, if you like that coming up all the time, certainly feel free to recheck that box and keep going that way. So that leads us in to a look now at the Ozone interface, which, as you can see, is dominated by this main work area here. And this always gives you visual feedback of the module that you're operating on at the time. In my case, this first equalizer box. So you can see down here, there's 7 processes listed here, and that's equalizer, reverb, harmonic exciter, dynamics, stereo imaging, post equalizer, and this maximizer module here, which also includes a very comprehensive dithering module inside it. And next to each one of these modules, you can see 3 little buttons. So this large square one is just an easy way of putting the processor in question in front of you. So I can click between them this way. This one next to it is quite clearly marked as a power button, so that turns the specific modules on or off. And a very easy to follow thing about the Ozone interface is that when you turn a module off, you get this very obvious sort of grayed out diffused color. So you know that module is not operating. So every single module follows that procedure. Here's the reverb module, obviously off, and clearly on. So it's a very obvious way to see what's going on. You can turn them on and off without bringing them to the front as well. So I'm turning the harmonic exciter on and off here, but we're looking at the interface of the reverb. So switch back to there. This third button here brings up presets for that specific module. Now this is not to be confused with that big preset box we had up before, which were the general presets or the global presets. So I'll just jump forward and show those again by clicking in this general preset area here. That brings up the preset manager for the plugin as a whole, and that gives us some fantastic starting points with very broad settings like general purpose mastering here. So I'm going to choose slide gating, and these presets will bring in varying amounts of all the processes involved down here. So in this case, this one you can see is only using the harmonic exciter is on there, dynamics, and the maximizer. So nearly everyone will have the maximizer on because you'll want that at the end of your mastering project. But as I flick through here, you'll see different combinations of processes coming on and off, depending on the preset. So they're the general presets, and they're organized in some really clever ways. We've got these general purpose mastering ones, as I've shown, and they're in a folder there. If I close that folder, we can see another folder now saying genre-specific mastering. So now we've got some really good ideas for starting a project, maybe country, drum and bass, electro, and I can scroll down, there's loads more, jazz, house, pop, and so on. So, of course, there's no rules saying this is how a jazz or a pop needs to sound, but they're good starting points for you to then go off and tweak, because you would never set and forget with a preset like this. You would just use it as a jumping off point to modify depending on the song. So I'll close that one off. Now we've got instruments and buses. So even as though Ozone is a mastering processor and is generally used for mastering, there's nothing saying you couldn't use an instance of Ozone on an acoustic guitar track or a brass section or so on. And in fact, with Ozone 5 Advanced, one of the great new features is that all these modules can be broken off as separate plugins. So we could have just the equalizer section from here or just the dynamic section from here, all available as a separate plugin. But as I said, that's only in Ozone Advanced. So that's the global preset manager. I'll close that there. And as I was saying back here, each one of these is a preset manager now just for those individual modules. So if I want to call up just equalizer presets, I can click there, and now we've got specifically equalizer presets. And again, they're named quite cleverly with descriptive titles that can give you an idea of what you're looking at. So drum and bass boost, we can hit that. Fletcher Munson, just for a bit of a smiley face, as they say. And so on. So various presets that way. Close that. Let's look at just the dynamics presets. And this dynamics module being incredibly powerful, as we'll discuss later. Some of these presets are giving us all sorts of crazy names. A little wider and brighter, using the mid side. Just randomly scroll down here. Punch and width, rock dynamics. And so we can click on any of these and everything will instantly update. Right, so we've covered this main work area. The 7 modules here, viewing them, turning them on, going to their presets. Now each one you can see it's got a little slider here saying amount. Now this is a very clever little function. Also over here we've got a master amount. Now we'll just cover this briefly now, but what the amount does is controls how much of that module, or indeed the entire plugin, contributes to the sound. So at the moment they're all defaulting to this center point, but we can, for instance with this equalizer, let me just make it bit more aggressive. So we've got something with a lot of bottom and, as you can see, a lot of top over there. Now if I turn this slider up, it will actually push those even further. So now the yellow curve is indicating what's going out of the plugin. So it's what we've got, but more of it. If I move it to the left, what we've got, but less of it. And obviously at its very lowest point, it's a flat line again, no EQ. That's kind of obvious with an EQ, but with some of these other plugins, it's a little bit obtuse as to what this slider is doing. And in fact, we can right click on it and choose what it's going to adjust. So at the moment, it's applying equalizer amount. That's what it's doing. But what about this? Configure smoothing. If I click there and now adjust it, you can see what it's doing now. It's actually, as I go down, it's tightening up the EQ curve. And as I go up, it's going to broaden that EQ curve to make a smoother sound. And here it's like a more surgical, narrow sound. So each one of these sliders, we can right click, and we'll cover this when we talk about the modules themselves later, but we can right click and you can see various options of what this slider is going to do. So on the harmonic exciter, there's a few changes there. Stereo imaging, just one there, the amount. Reverb, just the reverb amount as well. So it varies from slider to slider. Now over here is the master one, which will change all of them at the same time. So we've got some dynamics in. Let me just call up a preset. So we've got something quite aggressive there. Okay. Now as I move this, you can see all the sliders moving. And if we have a look at the EQ module at the same time, we can see that one changing as I move the global here. And if we called up something in the dynamics that actually moved dynamically, we would see that move as well. Let's have a look. No, not this one. Let's call up another preset. Rock dynamics, there we go. There we go. So we can see now the threshold of that compressor moving. So now as I move this, that's moving. If we move over to the EQ, that's moving. So we could actually push the whole plugin or back off the whole plugin depending on how we feel. So we might have set up a whole mastering chain that's quite conservative, and we just want to see how it's going to sound if we just push everything relatively equally. And it'll do an offset as well. So in other words, if I took this one down, and as you can see, these ones are all up a bit. I can push that one up, push this one down. Now when I move the master, they won't all snap to the same position. They'll maintain their relative balances, you see. Well, in this case, that one's turned off, so turn that on. Okay, quick reset. Let's just choose that as a nice reset. And a plugin reset brings everything back to 0 as well. So that setting is saved in the preset. Now over here, we've got the input and output meters, and at the moment they're linked. So I grab one input and the two of them will move. Option click back to 0, same with the output. Over here, we've got the padlocks, which will unlock them. Now this is terrific in those times when you're trying to master something that might be a little hot on one side, and you can just separate them that way. So I'll just play a bit of music through this. And you can see, so we can turn the left, right off or whatever. And same with the output, but in this case I want to keep the output even and just adjust my left and right input. Put that back together and link them again. Over here, the plus and the minus lets us adjust just the scale of this meter that we're looking at. So at the moment you can see we're coming down to about -30 here, which is absolutely fine for loud pop music as I've got there, because nothing much is falling below there. But if we're working on something with a very wide dynamic range, we might want to see a wider dynamic range. So if I hit this minus key here, now we're getting down to -50. Now we're getting down to -90, which is literally the entire dynamic range of a 16-bit signal. So if you're mastering for a CD output, you're not going to see anything lower than that anyway. So that's incredibly broad. And in the case now of this pop song, it's all going to be very loud up the top. So I would prefer to go back up to the quite narrow view of just those most significant areas up here. So anyway, that's your option for the scaling there. Down here with the yellow and blue button, that's going to switch the metering from left and right mode, as you can see there, LR, LR, into MS mode, mid-side mode. And that's, as I said, something we're going to discuss in quite a lot of detail later on in the tutorial. So when I play this track now with MS, we're going to get a lot more on the M meter and a lot less on the S meter. And the reasoning for that we'll discuss later and understand how to use MS more creatively in a mastering setting. So I'll put it back to left, right. Over here, a big bypass button, and this just duplicates the same bypass functionality that the main plugin bypass has there. So as you can see, on and off that way. And straight away, we're going to bypass every module, even if that module is on. So these modules are all on, but they're all going to show up as bypassed when the global bypass is on there. Now this little area here, I'll just draw a little rectangle around it there, and that's known as the standard module controls. And that's because these are the same, no matter what the module selected is, these controls are the same down here, though they do have changing functionality depending on which module is open. So first of all, over here, we can choose whether we're processing stereo, and I'll go to the EQ, which will make this more clear. We can process in stereo, which means everything we do is occurring to both left and right stereo channels. We can go to the mid side that we've mentioned, and again, more detail later, and that's when we can process mid and side independently. And one more click, we can also process left and right independently. So in this case, a separate EQ curve for the left, separate EQ curve for the right, if need be. And that varies on a module by module basis, depending on if they support mid-side processing or if they support separate left-right processing. A great feature here is that we can solo or bypass each plugin. Well, bypass is no big deal. We could just turn it off. But a great feature is that we can solo each module within the plugin. So we could have imaging on, dynamics on, whatever, all these guys on, and they're all doing something quite audible to the signal. But if we just want to hear the effect of our equalizer on the signal and not the effect of those, we can do that. And that's a very cool feature. I haven't seen that before in other plugins. So we want to know what our equalizer is doing without being biased by, say, what a multi-band dynamics processor is doing as well. Solo the equalizer and it's all done. So loving that. Next up, the options button. Scary one to push this. There are a lot of options in this plugin. Now, as you can see, there's a separate tab for every module, plus a general tab, plus an I/O tab, and there are options galore here. So we will cover most of these as we go through the various modules later on. But as you can see, no shortage of choices here. History is our big undo buffer, which lets us see all the things we've done, and we can do multiple undos right up into the hundreds. So if I zoom back here, even since I've just had this open, lots and lots of options there. Everything from turning things on and off to whatever faders you've moved and so on. The graph here lets us look at the processes we've got and the order they're in. And that enables us to put things in a different order if we need. So we might take the second EQ and we want it there instead. We might want our reverb in front of our first EQ for some reason. So whatever we want, we can do it that way. And also this is very functional around these shared crossovers here. So at the moment, the dynamics, the exciter, and the stereo imaging tool, which are the three multi-band tools in Ozone, at the moment they're all sharing the same 4-band crossover. Now, if we're not happy with that, we've got power to break them away and give them their own settings. So again, looking at that in the future as well. And here reset will just reset the visible module back to a default setting. So resetting that EQ puts that back to a starting point. And the help here is fantastic. When you install Ozone, it installs an HTML-based help file right onto your computer. So if I hit this little question mark now, up comes my default browser with help on exactly what I've clicked on. Now, as you can see, this is not online, this is file-based. So you can see the address there is not a www address, it's a file-based address. So this is all local on your hard drive, and you can search for whatever you want, or we can come into here and let's go into our imaging and decide we want some help on that. Stereo imaging. Lots and lots of detailed instruction on everything right under your nose. So that's just a brief tour now around the Ozone interface, and now it's time to start dealing with the modules one at a time and getting into some real detail. So I'll see you in the next movie. So the first module we're going to look at is the equalizer module here. Now, as you can see, there's two equalizer modules, this one here and another one over here called post equalizer. Now, for all intents and purposes, they're both exactly the same. There's a few reasons why you would have two, and one obvious one to me is that you would use this first equalizer to kind of condition a sound before it gets fed into dynamics modules, such as a compressor over here, where perhaps you might have some frequencies that are sticking out too aggressively in your mix, and you don't want the compressor to react adversely to those. So you might equalize over here for flatness first, then go into your dynamic stage over here, and then perhaps after that you might want to then add some sweetening equalizer, to push the bottom end a bit harder or to push the top end a bit harder, whatever you might choose. So think of it in terms of this one's more of a corrective EQ, that one's more of a sweetening EQ. And there's other reasons as well, but that's just one. And of course you don't have to use both EQs at all, just use one or the other. The rules are totally up to you. But let's have a look at how the EQ module works anyway. So as you can see, I've got that showing now and it's turned on, and it's the only module we've got turned on in the whole plugin at the moment. So right now we can see the display is at its full size. If we want to see more EQ controls, we can click on this plus button here and our visual display will shrink a little bit, and up pops all these parameters here. So now as you can see, there's 8 possible bands of EQ, which is more than enough for any task you'll be handling, I think. And within each of those 8 bands, we've got loads of filter choices. So I'll just turn on band number 1 by clicking on that there. I could also just double click anywhere in here if I want, and a band will appear. In this case, it's gone to 3 because I'm sort of near that end of the spectrum there. If I double click up this end, number 7's chosen to turn on because I'm near that end of the spectrum. So you can double click here to turn on bands that are off, as we can see, or we can manually turn them on and off from here. So in this case, I'll just go to number 1 and drag it out a little bit into here, and we can have a look at the filter shapes that are on offer. Now at the moment it's on a vintage low shelf option there, so that was the abbreviation V, low shelf there. But as you can see, there's loads of options for every single band here. So we can go for a traditional parametric bell shape here, and that's one we're probably all familiar with from parametric EQs. And just for the controlling now, as you can see, I can grab this little dot in the middle, I can drag up and down or left and right. If I don't want one to affect the other, I can hold the shift key down as I'm moving in one direction. So if we put that back to 0 again, if I want to move only up without any risk of moving left and right, I can hold shift key down and move up. Now, right now, as you can see the mouse there, I'm moving left and right, but it's not going. Vice versa, I'll release the shift key now and I want to move left and right, but not up and down. So I'll hold the shift key down and I'm moving left and right. And as you can see, I'm locked from vertical movement there. So that's handy. Next here, we've got the width control can be adjusted via these brackets here. Of course, all these can be adjusted just by dragging in these boxes as well. But if you want to do it graphically, grab the width control there, and that's the width of our bell filter. So they're the 3 controls we would need. If you want to double click on this, that puts it back to 0 as well. Keeps it on, but sort of resets it back to its default. Other filter shapes available to us are different sorts of low and high shelf, analog and vintage filters. And these are purely a matter of just personal preference. So have a listen and see what you prefer. The analog filters are more typical shelf filters that you would have heard in other equalizers, whereas the vintage filters are more modeled after classic Pultec designs. So slightly different shapes. If I put it on the vintage and push up here, we get a very, very smooth, long shape here. I can adjust the Q here to get a little bit of kind of what's called overshoot, like a little bit of a dip at this end. If I move it in, adjusting the Q there, as you can see, changes the shape. If I put this on analog, it'll behave slightly differently. So low shelf analog, drag that out more into that region there. And now the shape has a slightly different sort of action, like it tightens it up through here, but it doesn't actually put it under the line there at this end, like the vintage filter does. So different shapes for different scenarios. As like anything, just listen and see which ones you prefer. Sometimes those vintage filters are fantastic on the bottom end of drums, for instance, because you can boost the very deep bottom end, and then just under here where kind of the mud tends to appear, you can suck some of that out. So for instance, if I put it back to a vintage filter here, you can boost drums here, so you can get a massive bottom end, and then over here where it can get tubby, well actually that's about 500. You want to go a bit lower than that, say around 200-ish, where the drums can get a bit tubby. You can kind of get that, let go. You can get that little dipping effect under there, which smooths out that mud, but you still get this thunderous bottom end down here. So more experimentation on that, but it can be very useful. So they're the shelving filters. And then over here we've got low and high pass filters, and they can be adjusted with a standard low pass like that, where we'll bring it up that end because it's a low pass. And as you can see, we can adjust the steepness of the low pass here from a very, very steep 48 dB per octave. So that's quite a strong roll off there, right back to more gentle roll offs by opening up there. And now we're down to a 12 there, which is a sort of a more gentle roll-off, which doesn't sound quite as aggressive. And I'll give you some examples of these with a high pass. So I'll jump over to there and go to a flat high pass. Now at the moment I'll play you a bit of a track and do a sweep down here. So that's a gentle 12 dB per octave filter. If we make that very steep, it'll be much more aggressive with its roll-off, and we'll get a little bit of resonant ringing, but at the same time we get to preserve more of the spectrum before the roll-off occurs. So you can hear that kind of whistly resonance. Now I'll open that up there. So you can hear the subtle difference there as I open and close that down at that level there. Now, even more aggressive than that is we can have brick wall filters which, as you can see, it is like tumbling off a brick wall there. That's even steeper than 48 dB. It's significantly steeper. And now that will ring and whistle even more, but we can use this if we want to set a sort of a hard roll-off point that we don't want anything below, or if it's a low-pass filter, we don't want anything above. So let's have a sweep on that. So even more sort of resonant whistling there. So as a general rule, if you're just rolling off the bottom end off your track to get rid of rumble, you wouldn't be using a filter like this because there are some side effects. If you're just setting a roll off at the bottom end of your mix, you'd probably use a flat filter unless you really need to cut it off suddenly, as in perhaps there's something going on at 48 hertz, but you want to retain as much bottom end as you can, in which case, yes, you don't want to be sort of rolling off from 80 or so just so you can get down lower. You do want to have a more aggressive roll off, retaining as much of the bottom end as you can before you roll off. But for best results, you want a sort of a more gentle roll off if you can afford it. Anyway, they're the different filter shapes there in that band, and we'll see that the same filter shapes will appear in every other band as well. So I'll arbitrarily turn on band 4, there they all are, band 6, there they all are. So a bunch of choices there. We can call up the presets, as we said, specifically for the EQ, and there's a bunch of starting points we can go from. And we can just flick through those, and we can see some use more bands than others. Now that one that was orange there, it's gone into orange because it's actually splitting mid and side mode up, and we'll cover that in an upcoming movie, as I said. But that's why that one's gone into the orange mode, because we're looking at just the mid of the mid side at the moment. But all these other ones are showing you in red because they're in stereo mode, as you can see by this little option there. And that one in green because we're seeing just the left of the left-right mix. And we can show that now. So over here we've got, as we said, the stereo option, the mid-side option, or the left-right option. So it's quite simple really. Right now we're adjusting just the left of the left-right option. So if I push up over here, I'm pushing up just that area on the left-hand side. If I switch over to the right, we can see it's flat, so I could push that on the right-hand side. So now we've got a separate EQ on left and right. Now, if we want some things to be common, we can hit this little link key here. And for instance, that band there, I'll pull that down, and now that will be common to the two of them if I flick between. But they've still got their other unique things between them. Now, because this can get quite confusing quite quickly, they've color-coded things so we can see what we're doing. So green line there showing us the EQ of the left side, blue line showing us the EQ of the right side. And conveniently we can solo one side or the other as well. So I've made a bit of a mess of that. Let's clear it up and we'll do this a bit more cleverly. So let's take the left side now and we'll take out a whole lot of bottom end on it because that would be easier to discern. So I'll play. Oops. Let's take it out of link mode. And now we'll play and we'll drop the bottom end on the left side. Right, now if you're wearing headphones, that image should be immediately apparent. And we'll go to the right hand side here and we'll just push the top end on that. Okay, so now if I hit the S button over here, you can hear we've just soloed the right hand side. And vice versa over there, we've just soloed the left-hand side. The little B under each of them here bypasses the processing in that side, but doesn't actually turn off the channel, just bypasses it. So now as you can hear, now we've got a little bit of a phase problem because there was a time alignment issue there. So now by bypassing the left-hand side, there's a sample delay that we've incurred because the right-hand side's still getting processed, the left isn't. But the processing has stopped, as you can hear. And ditto over there, I've now bypassed the processing on the right-hand channel. But of course you wouldn't use that in normal use because you've created a latency there. Now one thing we haven't looked at yet is up here the EQ mode overall. Now matching is a special function which we're going to deal with in a later movie where you can actually take the EQ spectrum from one track and match it over the one you're working on, which is amazing. But at the moment, your choices here are just analog and digital. So as you can see from the pop-up help there, this is an analog modeled curve. And over here we have digital modeled curves, which are more precise. So I prefer analog model curves in general, which are more the sort of EQs we've grown up and heard before the digital revolution took over and made things more accurate and more precise, but not always more musical or musically pleasing. So now the analog model curves have a different sort of sound, and it's not something we can really sit here and kind of A-B quite so easily. But again, play with this stuff and see what you prefer in your work. Now, a couple of little right-click tricks we can do, just looking at this node in front of us now, instead of having to come down here and choose a new shape if we want to. So let's say we're boosting there and we want to change the filter type. We can just right-click on the node and that'll pop up the same thing. So we want to switch that into a analog high shelf filter, and then we tighten that up, decide it's not what we want. So let's try instead the vintage high shelf filter. So go there, don't like that, change it to a resonant high pass filter, and so on. Adjusting there. So right clicking there is cool. Down here on the frequency scale, we can right click that and view the frequency with other characteristics here. As you can see, just changes the way the bandwidth is displayed. So there's a few options there. Now over here on the gain axis, first of all, we can click and drag over here, which is great because if we've got, say, a lot of boosting going on in a band, let's just change that to something like that. We've got a lot of boosting in the band, but no cutting. We might want to just see more of the boosting, so drag the 0 point down here, but see more of the action that's going on above the line. But better than that, we can right click on here and change the overall scale. So let's put this back in the middle, put the 0 pretty much roughly in the middle. At the moment we're getting about 8 dB plus or minus here. We can go right to 6 times zoomed in. So now +3 is pretty much near our top. Zoom fully out, or other variants in between. So handy little way of being able to just check stuff out at whatever resolution we require. Now lastly, you've probably seen this spectrum display that's going on behind the display here when I'm playing. So by default that comes on. If we don't like that, we can right click in the screen here and we can go to EQ options and choose to not enable the EQ spectrum. So turn that off out of there, and now it's not there. Now, probably the two reasons you'd want to do that is it saves a tiny bit of DSP, not a huge amount. So if you can afford to keep it on, I usually do anyway, but if you're having a few CPU problems, you might want to turn that off as something that will conserve a little bit of power. And the other reason, I guess, is that maybe you might find it distracting. I actually quite like it, but if you do find it visually distracting, you don't want it there. Easily just turn it off. Now the response of the spectrum itself can be adjusted here in the spectrum options, and there's various options there and how it works. We won't go through them all one by one, but the actual way it responds and so on can be adjusted there. So that's the EQ module, and I'll see you in the next movie. Now we're going to look at Ozone 5's fantastic matching EQ function. And this is a great little trick that allows us to take the EQ spectrum from one song that we really love the sound of and apply that EQ spectrum onto our song that perhaps we're not so keen on the sound of and we want to fix up a bit. And it does this by analysing both tracks and then adding a relative curve onto our track to bring it up more like the one we want to copy from. And it breaks up the spectrum into an amazing 8,000 bands to do this. So it's pretty amazing and it's good fun to play with. So let's have a look. At the moment we've been messing around with EQ in the traditional sense. So we've been under this tab here, EQ bands, and we've got our 8 bands that we've been turning on and off and dealing with that way. But in this case, we want to move over here to the snapshots and eventually to this matching tab here to do this work. So let's go to snapshots first. And in here we can see a little list there, and we're going to take a snapshot or possibly more of our track and also the track we want to borrow from. So I'll play a little bit of our track now so you can hear what we're up against. So here it is. It'll start in the chorus and then move into a verse.
Build me up, never let me down, always be around, always on the grind, 'cause she don't wanna rock.
Okay, so there it is. It doesn't sound too bad, but it's not great. It's a little dull, hasn't got that sort of modern sparkle that current tracks today have. Now, what I want to use to borrow from is Jay-Z's Empire State of Mind, which, while is a totally different style to this sort of track here, is a track I'm really fond of. It's quite bright and snappy and punchy, and I really like the sound of it. Now, it might be a little bit too much for this track to overlay that EQ spectrum, but that's kind of the point. We'll be able to back off and tailor it and do things like that. So let's work out how to do all this. We're going to be capturing over here with this Start Capture button initially, and important here is this snapshot time. Now at the moment it's set to infinite, and if I pop up this, there's various choices under here from real time all the way up to infinite. Now the difference here is that real time will take an immediate snapshot of just that exact point, like taking a photograph. And that might be useful in some circumstances. Probably for what we're doing right now, not a great idea because it's only going to be taking a single snapshot in time. Whereas really we want to kind of get an overall feel of what the spectrum of the song is. We want to get one over time. So even 1 or 3 or 5 seconds may not be enough. So in this process, I'm a fan of say 10 seconds or even infinite. And let's have a look how that works now. I'll take a spectrum of our track here and I'll do it on real time first so I can show you what I mean. So I'm going to play it, start capturing, and nothing's happening until I hit stop. And then I'm basically taking photos of that point in time. There's one, piece in the list you can see. Start again, and there's another one. Start again. There's another one. So I'll stop. So now I've got 3 snapshots here that have brought themselves up in these nice, easy to see colors. Purple, yellow and white. If I don't like those colors, I can click in here and change them around to whatever I want, make that purple a little bit brighter so it's easier to see, and so on. Now they're all overlaid here, 3 different ones. I don't really know what I've done there. So in this particular case, I wouldn't be using it in this mode, but that's just showing you the different ways of doing the real time. So I'll delete, 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 and this time we'll go to a more averaged out capture. So a favorite of mine is just this infinite one. And you'll see why now. I'm going to capture our track and I'll start again now. So I'm capturing, and as you can see, this is getting slower and slower as it's averaging out the frequencies. Watch what happens when the verse comes in now. Boom, around here. See, it's popping up now because that's what the voice is doing. So it's averaging it out. Now it's pretty steady now. It's pretty much seen all it needs to see. I'll hit stop. Sorry, I didn't actually stop the capture there, did I? I stopped playback, but I didn't actually stop the capture. But no harm done. The average has been taken. So there's the capture there. Pretty hard to see in that purple. So again, I'll brighten that up. And there's our curve. Now I'm going to name that and call that Music Lover, which is the abbreviated name of this track. Now it's time to capture the Jay-Z track. Now, for copyright reasons, I can't play that in the tutorial, so we'll be turning the sound down at that point, and you'll be able to recognize the track by the lovely dancing green lights and the spectrum. So let's jump over to there. And I'll capture that exactly the same way, and in spite of the fact that you won't hear it, you'll be able to see the spectrum popping up now. Okay, so you can see there, it's not that dissimilar in shape, but it's a lot brighter, that track. Now, the reason it's a lot louder is because I'm using a finished mastered professional mix there, so it's a lot louder on the spectrum just in terms of amplitude. But you'll hear it'll make a huge difference when we apply this. So I'll rename that Empire State, and there we go. So at this stage, I need to click the matching button over here, which I could have done earlier, but I'll do it now. And that's brought up this red line, which is telling us what it's going to do to our mix to make it sound more like the other one. And I'll jump over here to the matching tab now. And over here, it's only a slight change there because this amount at the moment is only on 10 out of 100. Now this slider here, as you can see from that pop-up help there, is going to show us how aggressively the snapshots will be matched. The higher I bring this up, the more kind of jagged and aggressive that red matching line will get. You can see, so it's exaggerating how things are, and that's what it's seen. Now, before we jump to that, let's look at this section over here, the matching from and apply to section. So what we need to do is match from Music Is My Lover and apply that to Empire State of Mind. Now, oddly, it sort of works the opposite to what I would have thought. I would have assumed the logic is we are matching from Empire State of Mind, which is the commercial track, and we are applying it to Music Is My Lover, which is our track. But the way it works is actually the opposite of that. So we're matching from Music Is My Lover and applying it to Empire State of Mind. So this red curve here is what's going to be applied to our track to bring it up to the commercial track. So as we said, that's the amount or the kind of aggression of the matching curve. And over here is the smoothing. And as you can see, if it's not smooth at all, then it's incredibly aggressive. That's exactly, I mean, you might think that putting this up to 100 and then putting that down to 0, well, that's now giving us exactly what it heard on Empire State of Mind and applying that to Music Is My Lover. That's not really going to be a great example. And I can play that now to show that, because that's just way too aggressive. So this is what that would sound like. So it's really kind of all sort of phasey sounding, isn't it? Not pleasant at all. So while kind of mathematically or technically that might be a great thing, it's not what we want in a musical context. So iZotope tends to recommend sitting this thing at around 50 or so, and give or take whatever your taste incurs. And then we need to do some sort of smoothing, otherwise it's too aggressive with this here. So let's just smooth it out. Obviously, if we go to 100 there, it becomes just a very straight line. So if we just bring this down so it looks like a kind of natural EQ curve, maybe around there, and you can see there's a very now pronounced high-mid bump, which is exactly what our track was lacking. It was a little dull in that area. So if I bypass the whole plugin and play our track, and now let's bring the EQ in. Bypass. And there it is. Now for this track, that doesn't sound quite right, but what is fantastic is that we can take that matching EQ, say thank you very much for helping us along the journey this far, and then we can switch back to the normal EQ. That overlaid EQ curve is still there, and now we can come into our normal EQ and just go, that sounds reasonably good, but I think I'll just pull back some of this kind of honky high mid. And you can see now, using quite a broad EQ, I'm picking up that whole spectrum and moving it. So that's a little bit more pleasing. Bypass. Bring it up a bit more. Bypass. So I'll just go a little bit too far, then pull it back a bit. So that's where we were. That's where we are now. And so on. So that's matching EQ. Take the EQ spectrum from one song and overlay it over another one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next movie. Now we're going to have a look at MS processing, because this applies to several of the modules in Ozone 5. And so I thought we'd have a little look at equalizer first, but before we move on to reverb and down the line here, we need to have a look at MS because it does apply to most of the upcoming modules. Now, as we've already seen when we had a look around the user interface of Ozone, we've got this little switch here, which at the moment is set to stereo. And what that means in, say, the case of an EQ is that the adjustments we make are common to both left and right. The entire audio spectrum that we're hearing receives those manipulations. Now, the other options here are mid-side, which we're about to discuss, but quickly left-right, and that's where we can adjust the left and the right independently with our equalizer or harmonic exciter or whatever we're dealing with. But most importantly for this tutorial, it's mid-side or MS. So what that literally means is that we can manipulate not the left and the right, but the actual stereo information independently of the mono information in our mix. Now that gives us amazing power in a mastering setting because it broadens our mastering palette into a whole lot of things that we previously couldn't do. We can solve problems that we couldn't solve before, possibly even balancing problems, or we can create illusions of brightening things up without making them over harsh because we're brightening, say, the sides independently of the middle and things like that. So let's have a look how it works. This little matrix down here just shows us the mid is at the moment lit up. So that's the orange one. That's the line we can see. I can click on side. Now our spectrum here changes to blue. So we can work on either the mid or the side. If we choose for certain operations, we can hit this link key, and then whatever we do will happen to both mid and side. And very cleverly, we can also solo or bypass the processing on just the mid and the side. So the example I was giving before is quite a good one. Let's say we want to brighten up the sides of our mix, but leave the middle alone. So I'll play this other track now and you can hear the material we're going to work on. Now, by brightening up the sides of this mix, we'll also create the illusion that the mix is possibly a bit wider than it actually is. So you can have all sorts of benefits. At the moment, let's have a listen to the mids and the sides in isolation. So here there's a little solo button there for the mid, a little solo button for the sides. So when I hit the solo for the mids, you'll feel the entire mix kind of collapse into mono because we're soloing only the middle information and not listening to the side information. So there's the whole mix. Now solo. So that's dead mono. And now let's solo the side information. Now the vocals completely disappeared. Now as you can hear, the whole track has gone completely out of phase. If you're like me, you hate this sound, it completely messes with your head. If you hit the mono button now on your listening environment, everything will just completely disappear. Now, if that's too much for you to bear and you can't stand listening to the side information that way, they've got a great little trick here where we can go into our options, and under the general tab here, there's an option saying solo side channel in mono, as opposed to this kind of out of phase stereo thing that we're hearing now. So by selecting that now and saying OK, now when we listen to the side in solo, we hear it in mono. And for anyone who's interested, you can sometimes use this kind of trick to eliminate the vocal in a track if you're trying to create like a karaoke mix or something like that. Usually only good if there's not heaps of, stereo reverb and so on of the vocal spreading around, because you'll still be able to hear that. But if you've got a fairly dry mono vocal, you can remove it quite effectively with this technique. Though, of course, a lot of the other stuff that's in the middle of the mix disappears with it, so use with caution. Anyway, moving on. Our goal here is to brighten up the sides and leave the middle intact. So let's turn off our link. So we're operating only on the side channel. And let's do this in solo so we can really hear what we're doing. So listening to the track again now with this monoed side channel as we've chosen in the preferences. I'm going to go to a high shelf here and just push something up. And I'll go to a bell there and just make it even more obviously brighter. Okay, now let's hear it back with the whole track. Now, using the same methodology, we could perhaps, push the bottom end in the middle one if we decided to do that. So I'm going to solo the middle section here and click on mid. So we're now operating on that curve. So now you can see the blue curve's doing that. The sort of orange curve is dead flat at the moment. Now I'll turn on a bell down here, and let's just see if we can zoom in on where the kick drum is, for instance. Okay, that'll do. Pull it down a bit. I'll start again. So bypass there. Now that's out. As in the mid is out, the sides are still in, but we're only hearing the mids in solo. Okay. It's probably too much. We're getting the idea. Now take the solo off there, and we can hear our whole mix where we've got boosted high end on the sides and a little kind of boosted thump here in the middle section only. So I bypass the whole plugin. Now at this point I'm smashing the plugin too hard on the output here, but we haven't gone through any dynamics, we haven't gone through any maximizing, so We can kind of compensate for that by turning our input down at the moment if we want to, but it doesn't appear to be distorting too badly. So if we're happy with the sound, we can just leave that. But pull that down if you like. But already we've significantly kind of sparkled up the track. It's sounding a bit fresher now, and that's a good start. So that's mid-side in its basic mode. We will look at mid-side in these other modules as well, because it can be extremely useful, especially with dynamics and things like that, where you can tame certain parts of the sound field independent of others. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next movie when we're going to cover now the reverb module. Next up, we're having a look at the reverb module. Now here's the basic reverb interface in front of us at the moment, and the difference now is we have a little button up here that allows us to switch between two views. Now at the moment we're seeing the cutoff view, so we're seeing the frequency shape of the reverb that we're going to have running, which we can grab here and we can do a high-end roll-off there, and similarly over here we can do a low-end roll-off, so we can tailor the response of our reverb that way. These aren't repeated in controls down here, you just do it graphically from there. The alternative view up here is this impulse response view, which gives us a visual representation of what's going on with our reverb decay. Now, one really important thing about this reverb in Ozone is that it's a hybrid reverb. That is, it's both an impulse response reverb and a synthetic reverb. Normally reverbs are one or the other, an impulse response reverb being the one that samples a real space and recreates that very accurately in the digital domain. The downside of impulse response reverbs generally is that they're not particularly manipulatable. They're pretty much fixed, and sometimes just a few little controls you can change. The benefit of synthetic reverbs is that they're very, very tailorable. They're sort of like a synthesizer of reverb where you can adjust many parameters. So what's great about this reverb is that the early reflection section of the reverb, which is down here, uses the impulse response. So we've got a very accurate impulse response of a room, a plate, or a hall here. And as I click on those, you can see the response curve changing up there. So just the actual early reflections are impulse response based. Then the late reverb control over here is synthetic reverb, which gives us more control. So while we've got this very accurate impulse here, we can then make adjustments over here over a much greater range. So in many ways, this reverb is a combination of the two. Now, it's been touted as a mastering reverb, which in the past I would have considered was almost a contradiction in terms. I never considered reverb as something you would do at a mastering stage. It's usually, the domain of frequency or dynamic-based things such as equalizers, compressors and so on. But I've come around to the idea for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a really nice sounding reverb. It's not overcomplicated, and sometimes you get those dry mixes that just need a little bit of waking up. And we're not talking about the sort of reverb that you would put on a vocal, which is often quite obvious. It's usually quite a subtle thing, this reverb. Now, it can be broken off if you've got the Ozone 5 Advanced package, which we'll discuss in more detail later. It can be broken off to be a standalone reverb plugin. But even just within the normal Ozone 5 here, you'll find this can be quite useful. Now, it's got the standard reverb controls that you're probably very familiar with. It doesn't go into great detail about diffusion and things like that. It's just a pre-delay, which is the delay before the onset of the reverb itself. The decay time, which of course is the standard length of the reverb that we're used to on most reverbs. Low decay and high decay. So low decay and high decay is not the same as this. Low decay and high decay just dictates how quickly the reverb fades off in the high frequencies versus the low frequencies. So we've got a decay time of 1 second, then that's like a multiplier there. In this case, that's roughly at 1.0 as well. So the low decay would roll off in 1 second, whereas the high decay in this case would be 1.7 times 1 second. So these are like multipliers of the decay time. So in this case, you could make a darker reverb that's heavier there and rolls off quicker in the high end. That's distinct to how it actually rolls off after the fact here with this EQ. So that's even when these guys are fully extended. That multiplication still applies. So after that, it's just a dry mix and a wet mix. And it's quite handy having that rather than a standard wet-dry slider, which goes in both directions. This way we can keep 100% dry if we want, or any variation of that, as well as an independent wet. Now, let's have a listen to it. Sometimes it's not the most obvious of reverb, this one, which is good, because in a mastering sense, that's what you want. So just for exaggeration's sake, I'll leave that on Hall, and we'll just make some large reverb so we can hear what it sounds like quickly.
Back to your lips, that's my mission. I will will be polite and ask permission.
So at the moment we're 100% dry, no wet there. So when I hit stop, which is often a good way just to hear the tail of a reverb, is just to play something loud and then stop and hear the tail. So naturally there's nothing there. Now I can push this up to 100% wet and you'll hear this. There's a noise floor creeping in now. So of course I've gone huge there. It's not what we want to hear. What's good about this reverb though is that we've got this solo wet switch here. So even if we've got a mix here of 100% dry and 10%, 15% wet, if we want to hear the reverb component, we can just click solo. And then we can turn it up from there if it's not enough. Unsolo from there. So you can solo just the wet part of the reverb here, then you can bypass just the reverb module here, or solo the entire reverb module in relation to other modules, or you can of course bypass the entire plugin. So there's lots of great little ways of getting around the thing just to tailor what you want to hear at any given time. Now the other cool thing I like down here is the width control, which defaults to roughly around 100%, but then you can extend that all the way up to 200% for this kind of ultra wide tail. So let's have a listen to that. I'll just make it much more obvious here. So we'll have a little listen to it at 100. Okay, and if you've got headphones on, you'll hear the difference now. Push it up to 200 and do the same thing. So you get this wider sense of space. There's more reflections in there. It's probably a little bit sort of anti-phase information creeps in there to give the illusion that it's wider, and you'll get a larger space. But most importantly with this reverb for my money is using it in MS mode, as we discussed in our last movie. So I'd keep the middle dry in this case and just reverb out a little bit on the sides to create, again, the illusion of width, extra width, a little bit of space that may not have existed in a mix before. So get out of stereo mode and go straight into mid-side mode. I'd leave the mid-side alone, and in this case we can see we've got 100% dry here and 0% wet. So for all intents and purposes, that's just passing through unharmed. But on the side channel here, we can start doing some things. Now, rather than getting all bombastic with a hall and so on, let's just go for a little room there and bring the pre-delay down a little bit like that. And that's too much decay for this exercise. So we'll just have a little play and see where we're at. Now this will be much quieter because the side information on this mix is not going to be nearly as loud as the mid information. So there's a bit going on there. Let's now solo just the side information so we can hear what we're doing better. Right, so we can hear actually delays that are going on, which of course is in the mix. Now we can solo the wet now. All we're hearing at the moment is 100% wet and dry of the side only. Let's solo just the wet. Okay. We can make it brighter. Maybe less dull. Push up that. Now bring it all back in. And when I say all back in, of course, we've still got just the sides soloed. Now the whole thing back in. Now we'll bypass the entire mix and see if there's any difference.
So girl, a little pain, it will never hurt your body. And this isn't cheating if you not tell nobody. I gotta let you know that I'm tempted by your body. And the only purpose.
So for my money, I'm hearing the focus, well, probably gets less focused, you would argue, but it gets a little bit more wide, a little bit more spacey. And that's just an example. I haven't necessarily tailored that for this song particularly, but just to show you that you can do that sort of thing with your mix. Sometimes if it's a kind of a boring digital mix, it gets a little bit too sterile and everything's all in one spot, and you can kind of smudge things a little bit this way. So I hope that's useful for you. So just as we discussed in the mid-side tutorial, these standard controls now can be used as well, so we can link them if need be and focus on both sides, bypass just the processing on the side part if we want to. So we can just use that, there we go. So just sitting there and bypassing our side processing there, you can hear the image kind of collapse in a little bit, then open up again. So that's the reverb module in Ozone 5. I hope you found that interesting. And next up, we're going to talk about the crossover network that exists in Ozone 5 before launching into the harmonic exciter, which is going to be the first module that utilizes this crossover network. See you then. Next up, we're going to take a look at the crossover network, and we're doing that now because before we can dive into these three modules here, the harmonic exciter, the dynamics module and the stereo imaging module, we need to understand how they work. And all three of those modules are multi-band modules, which means they can process their audio between 1, 2, 3 or 4 frequency bands. So for a basic understanding of what's happening, let's click on the graph button here, which brings up a diagram of the signal flow of the plugin. Now, these are all freely movable, but at the moment you can see these three that we've talked about, the exciter, dynamics, and stereo imaging, are all grouped one after the other. And at the moment you can see here this is a shared crossover. So the three of them are sharing the same crossover, which at the moment is set for 4 bands. And we're looking at the harmonic exciter module up here, so we can see the audio has been broken up into these 4 bands, nicely color-coded so we can see what's going on. Now that's going to provide a superior sound benefit because all 3 modules are sharing the same crossover points, and it's nice and coherent. The plugin will sound great. But if that's not to our liking, we're totally at our will now to break these away and make them totally independent of each other. And in fact, the moment we change the order of one of these or drag one of these other blocks into the middle and break this little kind of group they've got going there, they're going to be independent. So for instance, if I want this EQ2 to occur before the stereo imaging module, I can break this off and drop it over there. Now, as you can see now, these two are still using the shared crossover, and this one's on its own. Still a 4-band crossover, but now I'm free to adjust that any way I want, and in fact can make that 3, 2 or 1 band if I choose. And same again, if we want to break the exciter off, say stick it before the reverb, we've broken that link now, and now we have 3 independent units. So understanding that they can be shared or can be independent is the beginning of getting our heads around all this. So let's close that now and leave them as just one big shared thing for now. So here's the harmonic exciter module, which we'll look at in more detail in the next movie. But just to give you an idea of how the crossovers work, here they are there represented by these vertical lines. So I can grab these vertical lines and move them this way. Now, as we said, because we're in a shared crossover now, it's the same for all 3. So if I drag that down there right to the very low end and switch to my dynamics module, there's the crossover in the dynamics module also down there. Again, if I drag this one out to the far right, go back to my harmonic exciter, it's been dragged out to the far right. So at the moment we're sharing, but we'll have a look in a minute when they're independent. So I can change the cutoff position simply by horizontally dragging these around. I'll play some track now and let you hear that I can solo each band or bypass the effect of each band in my crossover network as well. So by playing, there we go, I can just solo this frequency band in here, or the very low end. And by doing that, that allows me to drag this around and tailor the response. So if I was working, say, in the dynamics module and trying to create a de-esser, I can hone in on where those S frequencies are. So I could solo this and kind of just zoom in and, be a bit higher actually, wouldn't it, for a de-esser? So somewhere in there, and that would allow me to then isolate those frequencies and perform certain dynamic functions specifically on those. And at the moment we're in the exciter, as we said, but that would be the same principle in the dynamics module. The bypass button lets us bypass the effect of that particular part of the crossover. So if we were, for instance, pushing up, say, a whole heap of harmonic excitement there, we could then bypass the effect of that from here and hear things flattened out again. Now the crossovers themselves have various options. So let's right click up here and we can go to the preference here for crossover options. Now in there, this is the number of bands in the crossover we're looking at. So at the moment we're in the Exciter tab because that's the module we're in when I right clicked in the display there. So we can straight away now change that down to 1, 2 or 3 bands. Click it on 3 and you can see we've lost our one over here. Click it on 2 and we lose one over there. That's one way of changing the number of bands. I'll just stick it back on 4. We can also come along here and decide we want to get rid of this band over here, for instance. So I can right click there and simply remove band, and that one goes. Then I have to redo all these, of course, to whatever I require. I can insert the band and bring it back to 4 again from here. So these options are pretty handy. I can take settings from one band and paste them to another band. not so big, say, in the harmonic exciter module here, but in the dynamics module where there's lots of things going on. And of course, we will cover this in more detail in an upcoming movie. But for instance, I can take all the settings of this bottom one here. See how the color coding works too? Isn't that cool? So as soon as you click on one, the entire interface changes color to match that. So in the red group here, let's, just to be exaggerating, drag that down, drag that all the way up, and put that somewhere in the middle. And of course, there's all the other settings of these little knobs as well. I can now click on that red one, copy that, come over to the blue one, whose knobs are in a totally different position, and paste those controls on there. So copying and pasting between the bands. And something pretty amazing here is this learn option, which is where Ozone will actually listen to the track that you're playing through it, and using some sort of fancy scientific criteria which I can't even understand, will actually determine crossover points. So have a look how this works. At the moment, as you've seen, I've been just throwing these crossover points wherever I feel like. I'll hit learn and play, and check that out. And eventually it will settle. There we go. And that's it. So it actually searched around as you saw, and then when it finally settled, that's when our spectrum started dancing again, and we knew the learning process was done. So let's go back into the crossover options again. And we can see here there's 3 different crossover types. At the moment it's on hybrid, and if I click out of there, analog, and if I click out of there, digital. Now, these are 3 different ways the crossovers work. The slopes on the roll-offs in the analog mode are typical of those of old analog equipment, and while not being sort of accurate in a technical sense, they have a certain character and sound to them that is actually very pleasing for our ears, but isn't necessarily absolutely technically spot on, as opposed to digital, which is much more technically spot on, but has a trade-off, and that trade-off is a higher DSP usage and also a higher latency, which we can check in Pro Tools here, for instance, by looking down here at the latency of that track, which in this case is over 1500 samples, and watch what happens down here at that readout when I switch between these crossover types. Back to 300 plus for hybrid, and way down to just 43 for analog. So the hybrid one, as you could probably imagine, is like a cross between the two. Has certain elements of both the analog and the digital crossover, kind of doing a best of both, but not necessarily the same as either. So if it's absolute accuracy and transparency you're after, digital's probably the one you want. Analog's probably the one you're going to want if you want a certain character and aren't necessarily concerned with accuracy as such, but just want a certain sound that it gives. And it's one of these things where you're going to have to experiment, play through it, do some switching as you go and see which one you like. Digital is the only one that allows us to actually control the crossover size. So the crossover is the way the bands roll off and merge into each other. So as I open up this queue here, you can see that that's getting much tighter now, the way the bands respond between each other. So in other words, one will roll off much quicker and the other will come in much quicker. Whereas if we soften this here, there's a much higher blend between the two, as you can see, where they fall off and the next one begins. And if I switch over to the other modes, I won't have this crossover Q control. It grays out and I'm at a fixed length. But you can see the display change between analog and hybrid. So you can see there's all 3 are different. So just quickly before we finish this tutorial, let's create all 3 differently and have all 3 with different numbers of bands in them. So if I bring up graph now, they're still shared as we can see. Let's break them off from each other. Now they're all independent, but they're all still 4. So that's the dynamics we're looking at right now. We might say remove band and make dynamics a 3-band module. Let's go to exciter and leave that one as 4 and switch over to stereo imager and make that one just 2. So we could remove a band there, remove a band there, and there it is. So we've got 3 different crossovers in 3 different plugins, totally unrelated to each other right now. If we look in the graph now, we've got 4 there, dictated by that, 3 there, and 2 there. And we can turn the modules off here, and the appropriate module here will then sort of grey out, the crossover will disappear, it's no longer being dealt with. So same with that one, greys out there, and that one greys out there. So that's the crossover network in Ozone 5. They can all be linked together to share one coherent crossover, or broken off to be totally independent from each other. Now next up, we're going to look at the harmonic exciter module in proper detail. So now we're going to have a look at the harmonic exciter module that you can see in front of you here. Now at the moment, we've got all 4 bands in our crossover active. So that's why all 4 of these sliders here are all ready and not grayed out. If we were to change that crossover to less than 4 bands, the associated faders here would be grayed out. So we can do that quickly just by removing that band, and now this blue one is unavailable and the other 3 are active. But let's get back where we were. So this module has 4 different modes, and you can see them on the left here. You've got warm, retro, tape, and tube, and each one's bringing a different harmonic distortion model to the party. Because in real terms, that's what this module is. It's actually adding distortion. But when I say distortion, I'm talking about hopefully a pleasant and nice sounding distortion, as opposed to a grungy, horrible distortion. And rest assured, you can create a grungy, horrible distortion if you overdo this too much. And that's why discretion is probably the most important thing with this module. In fact, I would rate this as one of those modules in Ozone where, as much as you can do wonderful things with it, it also has the potential to create some real damage. So treat this one with care, because the beauty of this is also its downfall. You can really excite high frequencies and make your mix sound very bright and exciting, but at the same time it's easy to overdo that because of the way our ears quickly adjust to what we're hearing and begin to accept it. So before you send your mix or master off, make sure that you've lived with the sound of this for a little while and made sure you're really happy with what you've got, because it's a powerful little tool, as you'll see now. So these 4 modes, as I said, represent different styles of distortion. Some of them are pushing odd harmonics, some are pushing even harmonics. In a really simplified way, the even harmonics tend to be the ones that sound a little more pleasing to us. The odd harmonics are the ones that tend to sound a little bit more harsh and aggressive to us, but sometimes that can be exactly what we need as well. Tape is quite famed for pushing odd harmonics, and usually tube circuits are famous for pushing even harmonics. Now, of the 4 styles here, retro is most reminiscent of kind of like transistor distortion, and that's largely odd harmonics. Tape down here, as you can see by the pop-up help there, also pushes the odd harmonics through. And the tube and the warm are more your even harmonics ones. But they do sound very different from each other. So let's have a listen to these now, and we'll do an exaggerated case just so we can make sure they really stand out from each other. I'll stick it on warm first, and we'll try it on the bottom end, though usually excitation's on the high mids and the highs, but you can also create a nice sort of warm, grungy tone if necessary, if your track needs that, by pushing the bottom end. But just to hear the distortion characteristics of each plugin, we'll push the bottom end right up here. In fact, let's solo that band now. So now we're only going to hear this. Now as I push this up, you can hear what it's doing now. If I just bypass. Okay, if I go to retro, now you can hear that's breaking up because I'm pushing too much. So you can hear with that slider there. So we're getting more aggressive now. Now tape is really breaking up. So you can hear that, and tube is possibly more aggressive still. There you go. Now of course we wouldn't use it in this context. I mean, if I put that in the mix, it's too much, it's distorting. But listen to what it can do to that bottom. So it has got the ability to make that bottom not so much stick out. It's not going to make your kick drum more snappy or anything like that, but it's going to make the bottom end of the mix appear apparently louder by pushing through, because you're creating higher harmonics. So the frequencies are here, but we're creating harmonics that are stretching right into the kind of more sensitive section up here. So you can create that illusion that there's more bottom end than there is without actually creating more thump. But more importantly, as we said, it's the high frequency excitation that this module is probably going to be used for more. So I'll pull that back down, and we'll do the same thing here, just in isolation. Let's use the mid-highs here, which we're very sensitive to with our ears, and solo that up and do the same thing. So you can see there. I suppose I better explain quickly that the amount and mix sliders for each one. The mix is kind of like a wet-dry mix between the original unprocessed sound that we've got to start with and our excited version. So generally you could leave that at 100, let's say, and then the amount controls like how many harmonics are being mixed into that signal. So the more I push that up, we're pushing more harmonics, a higher number of harmonics into our mix. Now, of course, there could still be a case to push this up and at the same time maybe pull that down to compensate as we go. So we're pushing in a lot of harmonics, but blending them wet-dry style, not as heavily, or vice versa, 100% wet-dry and pushing less harmonics in. So just for this exaggerated example, let's push that up quite high and listen now. I'll go to warm first. Okay, move to retro. Okay, that one really kicks in. And that one really does break up, as you can see, when it's pushed hard. And that one even more so. So this warm one was actually quite nice up there, wasn't it? Put the whole mix in. Subtle. As opposed to, say, tube, which is going to be very aggressive, as we heard. So we would just mix a tiny bit of that in. So even that much, if we bypass that band from here now, which we were looking at before, yeah, so it does create quite a certain amount of audible distortion, so you have to be very careful how much you dial this in. And in fact, if you look at the presets that iZotope provide here, I'll just jump through a few. Look at the amount slider in some of these presets. You can't see the ones hiding behind here, but they're quite low. So even something that's designed to give you a very bright tone, let's say add sparkle, I'll hit on that, we'll close that. Well, they're only using 2 bands in this example, but again, not pushing it particularly high. So use with caution, but a lot of power is under the hood here. So you can really make a huge improvement. Now let's switch back to 4 bands. So insert a band, spread them out a little bit. So we've got our 4 modes and we've got our amount and mix sliders as we've shown here. Now up top, as we can see at the moment, we're in the crossover view, so we can drag things around here and control our amounts from down here. There's also another option here. If I switch to the spectrum options and then jump over to general here, little option here called show mini spectrum handles in the crossover subsection there. Now if I click on there, little red handles have appeared here. Now we'll get out of the way. And now I can control these amounts just by grabbing on these handles. And this same option will actually appear in other multi-band modules as well. So I can now grab this, and it's just another way of adjusting that. So I can push that up, grab hold of those. So handy as well. So just sticking with the view for a minute, that, as we said, is the crossover view. Over here, we've got the post filter and excitation view. So I'll pull these down and check what happens when I play now. Okay, so we've got a black background there, but when I push some of these bands up, sort of like this dynamic view here that's showing us how excited that particular frequency band is. So we can push a few more up. So a handy little visual aid there just to see how much harmonic excitation is occurring within a certain band. Also here we've got a post filter that we can apply over the entire module at the end of its line, and this is just a basic low pass filter, but we have some control over it. Have a look at this. I'll push that up first, and now, so you can't go above 0, but you can shape things well below that. Okay, now I'll bypass the whole module. So as you can see, you can kind of excite things up, possibly to the point where they become a little bit hard on the ears, but then you can roll off some of that nastiness here, but you'll still have some more kind of body and excitation created within the spectrum down here. So play with that and see if that can help you. Now down here, the last 2 buttons we've got are oversampling and show delay. Oversampling will increase the quality of your project, but at the expense of massive CPU increase. Now, if you're using Ozone as a mastering processor, it may be one of the only plugins you've got on there, you'll have that DSP up your sleeve. So here in Pro Tools, I'll open up my system usage window here. Now, this is a 2009 Mac Pro, so reasonably powerful, but not the latest kit on the block. And at the moment, you can see I'm pushing 9 or 10% there. As soon as I click the oversampling button, look what happens. Up it jumps into the high 20s already. So just that one little switch has made a huge difference. Now 30% is fine. I've got 100 up my sleeve, so I should be cool. But if I was sharing with a whole bunch of other plugins, it might create a problem. but it will give me better sound quality. So let's leave that on. Show delay will bring up 4 little delay lines for each band there. So band 1, 2, 3 and 4. And each of these is a millisecond base delay between 0 and 10 milliseconds. So this is basically a phase delay, which can allow us to sort of line up some of the low frequencies, for instance, with the rest of the track. So iZotope recommends, for instance, at frequencies below 150 Hz to put a 1 millisecond delay here. Now the difference is very, very subtle, but what that's going to do is delay the bottom end for just a millisecond, and it may have the effect of making the bottom end a little less loud, so it might fall away a little bit, but then things might tighten up as well. So it's to correct for phase anomalies that are going to be occurring during the excitation process. So our crossover here, where are we? Sort of at right up there. Let's make this a very low one, say 150 or so. I'll turn these ones down. I'll push that up a bit. Okay, that's with the 1 millisecond delay. Just have a listen to the kick. Put that back on 0. I think the kick is certainly a bit louder with it on 0. Go back to 1. Certainly subtle. I think the kick's a little bit softer there, I'm not sure. In this situation, I'd probably take it at 0. But in different situations, there will be times when adding a little bit of delay in line may help the situation, just in terms of phase cohesion between the bands and so on. So that's the harmonic exciter module. Next up, we're going to look at dynamics, which is a massive module inside Ozone. So we're going to split that up into a few chapters, and I'll see you over there. Okay people, buckle up. We're about to attack the all singing, all dancing dynamics module in Ozone 5. And we'll be breaking this up into 3 separate movies because of all the features held within. Now, what you can see in front of you now is the dynamics module broken up into 4 bands, as it often defaults to. Now, for the sake of simplicity for this first tutorial, I'm going to break it down to just one single band so we can see all the controls there. And then as we develop our knowledge, we can open up into all 4 bands. So I'm going to do it this way by coming down into this little area over here, or here, or here. It doesn't matter. I'm going to right click, and that will automatically default to dynamics options being at the top of my list there. Click on that, and we've seen the crossovers preference from a previous movie. So I'm going to just click on this and go from 4 to 1 just to simplify the plugin. So now we've got a single band dynamics module here. So first of all, I'm going to play some music through and let's see what all the bells and whistles look like. Okay, so over here you can see we've got a histogram. Now this histogram over here is one of 2 views for this area. The histogram is really useful because it can show us how loud our track is over time, and that enables us greatly in being able to set the threshold where we need it to be. So looking at this right now, we can see that all the energy is at the top of this little mountain, so a little sideways mountain really. Most of the work seems to be happening right there. So that's telling us that's a pretty good place to set our threshold, and that will start compressing things above that point. Now the other way of looking at this, if I right click in this area, dynamics options, this is the threshold meter, so it's defaulting to histogram. The other option we've got is a normal gain reduction meter that we're more familiar with other systems. And you can see now, there's our meter going up there, and then we can apply gain reduction to that, which will show up as a red gain reduction meter, which we'll look at in a minute. So first, let's look at the 3 submodules available to us in the dynamics module. So we have a limiter here, a compressor here, and a gate expander here. Now, we'll explain what all 3 things are doing. The limiter really is just the same as a compressor, but what's clever about Ozone is that these 3 modules are totally independent and can work on different sections of the audio. So we can use our limiter just to grab the loudest bits that are sticking through a track without those parts having to be dealt with by the compressor. So therefore the compressor can spend its time focusing more on that middle level stuff that needs to be controlled. And then at the bottom of the line, the gate can be closing down on the soft stuff and getting rid of it, or in the case of a mastering job, you might want what's called an upward expander, and the module can do that as well. So we're going to look at all that stuff now. So let's play this track again, and let's initially just set our threshold for the compressor. Now on the right here we can see our little graphic display, and at the moment it's zoomed out fully. We've got these little plus and minus buttons here. So what's good is that when a lot of the action is happening, say at the top end here, and it all gets quite tight, we can zoom in to that area. So let's have a look. Zoom in, right, and now I can grab these fellas here, which represent thresholds that we can also control from over here. And you can see now some gain reduction occurring there. So now we can tell straight away that this corresponds to that slider there. This is the slider for the threshold of the compressor. So therefore this up here is the slider for the threshold of the limiter. And you can see it moving there. And down here is the threshold of the gate or the expander, which we can't see moving on this graph at the moment because we're zoomed in. So I'll zoom out a bit more, and there it is down there. And that one reflects that one. So this little zooming ability is quite good, because usually in a mastering setting, you're not gating as such. So I don't need to look at that. We'll come back later when we do some upward expansion. I'll zoom in again to this top area here, and we'll focus on these two. So now that we know that these are the thresholds, we can switch out of here, go back to our histogram option, and really see what's happening over time. So without worrying about gain reduction meters, we can set that to a point right on the tipping point there. Okay, let's bypass. Right, so there's a slight change already. Now, we haven't actually set any controls with any intelligence yet, so things should get better. Now, at the moment, the ratio we can see there is 2.2 to 1, so we can control that. And you can see the effect that's having on the graphic display there. The curve obviously getting more steep horizontally there as we go to a higher ratio. Now in a mastering setting, you're not going to be wanting to have particularly high ratios. So usually somewhere between, well, even 1.5, as low as that, all the way up to possibly 3 or 4 to 1 if you're trying to emulate that SSL bus compressor thing that they do. But 4.1 on one compressor is going to be more aggressive than 4.1 on another compressor, just depending on things like the knee and so on, which we'll adjust in a minute up here. So I'm just going to set that to 2 to 1, or just over 2 to 1 there. And now the attack and release. On a mastering setting, it's going to be different to individual instruments or voices, but I'm going to be happy with, say, a little bit less than that, maybe 20 or so. Release time around 100 to 200. So bring that down a bit. Maybe there. Now let's have a listen. Physical therapy, body taking shape like them call them in the magazine, Hollywood quality. Okay, getting somewhere here. Now, this knee control here, the knee refers to the point at which the compression kicks in on your line there. So exactly where this circle is actually, where the threshold is being controlled from. So our signal's coming up here, totally linear, and then it hits the threshold, and then the threshold is the point at which the compression kicks in. And let's make it a bit more aggressive for the sake of showing off this example. Now I'll zoom in some more. Oh, we've lost it. Back down a bit. There we go. Okay, now the knee is how aggressive this knee, because it looks like a bent leg, how aggressive that angle is. So a hard knee means immediately off it goes. If I soften that knee, and you can see there, that little bend suddenly flattens out. So our two options here are soft and hard, and you can see now that the curve comes up and kind of gradually turns that corner. So what that's going to do is provide a less aggressive compression, and that might be exactly what you need, or conversely a hard knee might be what you need if you've got something that's a bit out of control and you really want to tighten it down and clamp down on it. So the choice is yours depending on your material. I quite often like hard knee compressors, but only touching them gently, as opposed to maybe a soft knee that you can hit a bit harder because it's more forgiving. So I might be hitting that a bit hard now, because you can hear it fighting me back. That's even worse, you can see. Well, of course it's a bit hard because I pushed it up to 6 or 7 to 1. So bring it down to 3-ish. And you can hear the sound. So look, if I hit it a bit hard there and now push the ratio up, listen to the sound. Right, you can hear it fighting you. In fact, the release is probably a bit quick to do an experiment like that. If I slow the release down, I'll probably be able to get away with a bit more of that crazy crazy compression.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood quality, got the credibility.
Yeah, so look, if it's not immediately obvious, the attack control controls the time it takes before the compression kicks in. A too fast attack might be taking the transients off the fronts of drums, for instance. So you might want fairly strong compression, but you still want your drum attacks to slip through unharmed. So the attack control can be useful, for instance, in handling something like that. The release control controls how long it takes before the compressor then backs off and stops compressing. That is, assuming that your signal has fallen below the threshold again. So too short release times are not great because the compressor kind of throws the sound back at you in a very unnatural fashion, which is often called pumping if it becomes too obvious. And too long release times are not good because the compressor doesn't fully release before kind of the next wave of attack comes along and pushes it down again. So the compressor never actually lets go properly in that case. So you have to do your timings based on feel, the type of song you're doing, and some people even do their release times based on tempo, so the compressor can kind of become part of the band in a way. It kind of moves back and forth with the music, often in quite a musical way. So there's no magic numbers that we can feed people to tell you where to set these controls. It's just got to be done by instinct. Anyway, let's get out of here to a more sensible approach again. So we'll push our threshold up there and pull this down here. Now, an example of how we could use this limiter, for instance, now, because it kicks in before the compressor, we can set our limiter to a fairly high ratio here of, say, 10:1, as it is. Now, this is not to be confused with the limiter in the maximizer module, which is what we call a brick wall limiter, an absolute full-on stopper that nothing gets past. This limiter can be passed. I mean, 10:1, even if we push it up to 25:1. I mean, a strong enough signal will still get through there. So it's not actually giving us any sort of level insurance. This is still part of a dynamics module, which is pre-final maximizer. Anyway, so let's go now and set this limiter, and I'll even push the compressor back out of the situation. So it's the limiter that's doing the work. Well, now, of course, they're moving together, you see, because part of the rule of this, I better just show this quickly, part of the rule of this is that the limiter threshold, for obvious reasons, can't be lower than the compression threshold, and vice versa, the gate threshold can't be higher than the compression threshold. So if I get to there, it pushes that along. This one will push that along, push that along. So that they have to exist in that order. So back to where I was.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine.
Can you zoom in here?
Yep, right at the top. Sweeter than Ovaltine, got the placeability, y'all. Body go down with demeanor, sweeter than Angelina. Sizzling, bubbling, got man troubling, cause them walk at you in. If a girl try to take your man, try to take your man, girl, you let them know. Cause you are the best girl, pose for the camera.
Now, by placing it on that side of the histogram, we've just lost it there, but I'm putting the limiter sort of on the downhill of the loudest stuff on the histogram. So it's going to grab just those few things that push the track over the top there, and you do that so the limiter can absorb those peaks and not bother the compressor with them. The compressor can spend its effort working on the meat of the song and not just these few stray peaks that get over the top. So another look at that. So I've got the threshold set, well on the downhill of that. So it's not going to do much. It might just do a few things in the whole track. Set the threshold where the meat in the track is there. Now let's bypass. Okay, pretty subtle. Not much happening there at the moment. But mastering is a subtle game, so this is not going to be a night and day difference thing that we deal with. If you want to get a little bit more aggression and loudness out of the track, we can pull the compressor down further. Now might be a good time to point out over here the makeup gain section of the compressor. So what happens is as you're turning things down, you can then make up that level later. When I say turning things down, if you're bringing the threshold down on a compressor and putting things into compression, then effectively you're turning them down. You're stopping those loud things from getting through. But then at the other end of the compressor, if you need to, you can push the gain up, which is called the makeup gain. And therefore you are making up the gain that you've lost, but then what you are benefiting from is that squeezing, if that's what your track needs, to get more density and volume into the track. So at the other end, you'll come out with a louder track with the softer things in the track brought up. So over here we have the makeup gain. And so you can see there, that's the level of the whole mix. Now we can run that, or if we want, we can run the plugin in auto gain mode as well. Now auto gain will make up the gain for us as we pull things down. So let's have a look at an exaggerated example of both. I'll get out of there. I'll turn the auto gain off now. Now if I start compressing extremely heavily, listen to what happens. Okay, our track's getting softer and softer and softer, to the point because we're squeezing the life out of it and pushing it to the middle of nowhere. Now, if we have the auto gain set to on, look what happens when I start doing that. The track's fighting back. It's automatically making up that gain. Now I'm compressing it. Listen to that horrible compression. Because I'm compressing the track beyond all belief. I mean, if we switch to the other meter, look how much compression I'm actually adding. Yeah, that's just insane. But yet the track itself is trying to keep up with that level. If I turn this off now, so you can hear how much makeup gain it's actually adding. Also, while we're over in this section, we can see a mix control here, which modern compressors are starting to add now, which allows us to blend the compressed signal with the uncompressed, totally dry signal. And effectively that's known as parallel compression. We normally do that using two faders, having to have one as the compressed fader on your mixing desk or virtual mixing desk, and the other one as the dry one. In this case, we can do it all in just one step. So again, I'll exaggerate that so we can hear the effect. Okay, so that's a very, very compressed signal there. If I put this to dry, that's a totally dry signal. So now I can blend in the overly compressed one with the dry one. Right, so you can blend in parts of the overly compressed one, which lets you in many ways compress harder than you normally would, for instance, because you're going to be blending in some of that unprocessed sound into it. All the transients are not necessarily then going to get eaten up because you can blend in the original back with it. Now all we need to show now is the gate. So let's back off here so we can see our spectrum, exactly what's going on. I'll take some of that compression away so we sound a bit better again. Now let's bring up the threshold for the gate. Now what this is going to do is not something we would normally do in a mastering sense, but let's show you how it works and then you can decide if you need it in a mixing environment. So you can see here now, looking at this graph, I'm dropping off the level there. So now when things drop below this point, they're going to get attenuated because the curve is moving in that direction. So let's exaggerate this so we can hear the effect. I'm going to need to push this up even further. There you go. So because this is a relatively loud master to start with, I'm having to go up to this very high threshold just to get this thing to work. But you can hear now. So as the signal falls below this point, it gets attenuated, turned down, and how much it gets turned down is controlled largely by this ratio control here. So if I put this to a very, very high ratio, and I'll zoom in again up here so we can see what's going on. A very, very high ratio, it's literally just a drop off the cliff there. So that is a true gate in that sense of the word. If I back the ratio off a little bit, then it's acting more what is generally known as an expander. It's pushing down, but it's not pushing down quite as aggressively. It's pushing down by a much lesser ratio. So often it's the same distinction a gate is to an expander as a limiter is to a compressor. Some people say, what is the difference between a limiter and a compressor? And it's not etched in stone, but often you say a limiter is just a compressor working very, very hard, generally at a ratio of 10 to 1 or more. And similar thing could be said about a gate. If that's a gate there with a complete hard drop off, then coming back below that is an expander. Now one really cool thing about the gate expander portion of the plugin down here is that the ratio can actually move to the left beyond this 1-to-1 ratio. So up until now, all our ratios have been above 1-to-1 and creating this kind of curve here. But if we move to the left further, we can go lower than that and look what happens over there. Now, rather than things going downwards and being switched softer, softer sounds are being turned up as reflected by this axis here. So that now allows us to bring up the soft details in tracks louder without affecting them at the top end here, which is what the compressor and limiter are doing. They're grabbing things that are too loud, let's say, and pushing them down. This is the exact opposite. It's grabbing things which are deemed by the threshold to be too soft and turning them up. So to demonstrate this, I've got a vocal here. Now let's hear it totally flat. So as you can see now with a perfect diagonal there, there's no gain reduction occurring except for this limiter, which is right up the top. So we'll never reach that. So I'll play the vocal.
So many times I've tried to tell you, but I can't find the words to say.
Now as we can see here, most of the energy is kind of peaking up there. So let's grab the threshold for our gate and push it up to around there. And now with this ratio, I'm going to start bending things back that way. So now soft stuff that was down here is now going to be up here. It used to be down here at that point. It's now going to be pushed way up there. So in this case, it's probably going to be kind of the breaths as she takes in between and things like that are going to be madly boosted. So let's have a listen.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
Breath.
But I can't find the word.
Right, now as she takes a breath, you can see here now these yellow gain reduction meters kick in. Well, they're actually gain addition meters in this case. The red ones for the compressor were poking down from up here, so they're gain reduction meters. This is like a gain change in the upward direction now, so they're yellow. So every time the plug-in is boosting the level, it's showing us by these yellow meters popping up. Now, because most of her vocal is actually above this level, I'll keep pushing this threshold even higher. I mean, it's going to become incredibly unnatural, but for the sake of this exaggerated example, we'll be able to see what's going on.
So many times I've tried.
So you can see there a bit of yellow.
To tell you, but I can't find the words to say.
And of course, very unnaturally, once it lets go of the breath and her vocal kicks in, it kind of gets out of the way in a very unnatural way. We can mess with the time constants to make that a bit smoother. And also over here, we can look at the detection of the entire dynamics algorithm. And the choices here are peak or RMS. Now, peak means that the dynamics module in general, and that's all three components there, are going to react to the peak things in the program, the little pieces that jump up suddenly. Now, that in some respects is not a very musical way of measuring loudness. RMS, which is an acronym for root mean square, is a more accurate way of measuring loudness in a program and might be kind of less spooked by some of the sudden jumps in her voice. That in collaboration with the attack control here. So let's have a listen now. I'm going to slow the release down a little bit so it doesn't let go quite so aggressively. Let's see if we can get this to sound a bit better.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
Now the attack's coming in a bit too fast, isn't it? Let's push that even further up. Right, even more.
So many times I've tried to tell you, but I can't find the words to say.
Okay, so you get the idea. We're very, very aggressively pushing up soft things, which in this case is the breath, not something we'd necessarily want to push up. I can clamp down now with the compressor there with a bit of a stronger ratio. So now what'll happen is when things get along to this area here, they're all going to be jumped on from whatever. So what we're doing now is limiting the dynamic range in both directions, upwards and downwards.
So many times I've tried to tell you, but I can't find the words to say.
Now we can take that even further by clamping down here, which of course is dragging that one with us. And so we're really limiting the range of this program entirely. I'll even lift that more. So look at that. It's almost like a horizontal line.
So many times I've tried.
Okay, I'll turn the auto gain on and let's see where we are.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
Make it up from there. So we're ending up with a thing now, kind of like almost like a television or AM radio sound where there's no loud and soft.
So many times I've tried to tell you, but I can't find the words to say. So many times.
So you get the idea. Very powerful dynamics manipulation, obviously beyond the grain there, but giving you an idea of the sort of control you've got. Okay, so that's the end of our first movie on dynamics. In the next movie, we're going to add MS into the equation. See you there. Okay, so now we've covered the limiter, the compressor and the gate in a single band formation. So far so good. Now we're going to switch the plugin over to MS mode to take the experience even further. Now I'm going to just pull up a preset from here that iZotope have added, and I'm going to grab this one up here, add richness and depth mid-side. So now the plugin has switched to MS mode, as we can see down here, and now the side part is in blue and the mid-side is in orange. Now at the moment we're in 4 bands. I want to get rid of that. We're going to explore multi-band in the next movie. So I'm going to go back to 1. And so here's what we've got. Again, a single band dynamics module, but this time in MS configuration. So as we said, the mid parameters are all in orange. The side parameters are all in blue. So we've got that very strong color coding to keep us on our toes so we know what's what. Now, as we learned in our mid-side movie, we can link the controls of the two by turning on this little linking icon there. So now whatever we do to one, we're going to do to the other. But keep in mind that doesn't mean that therefore they're going to sound the same, because they're still reacting independently. The mid is driving its own little dynamics module and the side is driving its own dynamics module. It's like we're running 2 separate modules on 2 separate parts, but for convenience sake we can link them here to do our thing. I'm going to hit play now and see what happens from these settings.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood quality, got the credibility.
Now I can hear the sides jumping out a little bit, and that's because just at the end of our last movie we learned about upward expansion. That's what's happening here. This is the sides graph, and they've got a little bit of a boost on the soft stuff down here. Now because of this great little matrix of solo and bypasses here, we can listen just to what the sides are doing. And there it is. I can bypass that just to hear what it sounded like before that processing. Right, so it's softer and less percussive. With the processing in, kind of jumps out a bit unnaturally. But what that does do is make the sides poke out a little bit more in this mix. If we listen to just the mid,
physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine.
Bypass.
Hollywood quality, got the credibility. Sweeter.
Okay, not too much happening there. Let's compress the mid. So I'm going to switch over into mid mode now. I'm going to drag down the threshold of the compressor section here, which is set to just a 1.3/1. Let's just get a bit more aggressive with that for the sake of this.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl.
Right, so we can see that working there. In fact, we can hear it pumping away, so it's working a little bit too hard. But for the sake of this, let's keep it on. Now, let's go to the sides, and we can tweak this or do something different or whatever we like with it. So I'm just going to do the sides in solo. And my intention now is to do something to the sides so they strengthen and thicken out and make the track sound even wider. So perhaps we'll bring this compressor down more. Make up some gain on the compressor here because auto gain is not switched in. So I'll bring the gain up manually. I'll back off the effect of that so it's not so aggressive, the upward expander, and I'll get my power from compression. Pull that out of the way a bit. I'll shut down that release so it's a bit quicker to recover. And now I'll boost the output even more. Now, before and after, this is just the sides we're listening to. There's the before, and there's after. So it's a more aggressive attack we've got now, and a louder sort of approach. I'm going to switch this over here over into histogram mode so we can see exactly what's going on over time there. Now we're just looking at the histogram of the sides at the moment. So you can see I've got the threshold of the compressor on the south side of the top of the hill, so we're compressing quite hard. I might bring the limiter in for a little bit on the north side there. Okay, now bypass. Right, so it's weaker sounding. Now, let's bring it all in and listen to the effect. Now I'm hearing a strong sort of out of phase sound coming from the sides there, and that's probably due to pushing them so hard. But just giving you an idea that we can work on them independently, and in fact we can even just turn the processing off on the mid altogether and just make the sides do the work here. So it gives us that fantastic control over the sides of the mix that you wouldn't normally have. So another listen with the mids bypassed now.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood quality, got the credibility, sweeter than Ovaltine, got the placeability.
Now I'll bypass the sides as well.
Sweeter than Angelina, sizzling, bubbling, got man troubling, cause them want get you in. If a girl trying to take your man, try to take.
So there you have it. And of course, don't forget that the mid-side processing is a feature of this plugin in many of the modules. So if things are kind of too bright or dull to our liking there, we can MS equalize them, MS excite them. So lots of options there. Now, while we're here now, we're going to have a look at the preferences for the Dynamics module. And there's not too many. So I'm right-clicking here now to bring that up. Or of course, I could just click on options there and find my way to Dynamics, which is that one there. So the crossover options here we've already dealt with in our crossover tutorial, so they're exactly the same. So really all it is over here is the histogram or gain reduction module, which we've covered. The option here to turn on or off the curve level meter, and that's referring to the meter that's jumping up through there, in this case orange or blue meter there. And if for some reason we want to have that disabled, I don't know why, I'd quite like that to be there so I can see what's going on, but it could be an issue of CPU, or maybe you find it distracting. I can turn it off there and it no longer happens. So that's that option. I prefer to keep that on. And over here, interestingly, the gain reduction draw mode is either detached or attached. Now at the moment it's detached, which means that, and I'll just pull up get a downward one happening at the moment here. Sorry, I'll switch over into gain reduction mode so it has some relevance. Now, as you can see up here, the red meter pushes down when we're compressing. So it's pushing down from the top as these green meters are pushing up from the bottom. We do have the option to have it attached to the green meters that are pushing up. So you get this kind of look. Now, it's only affecting the visuals. It's nothing to do with the sound. You get this kind of look. So the gain reduction meter sticks to the meters. So cute as that is, personally, my preference is the other way because I guess that's just what I'm used to from other plugins. So I prefer that one. But the option is there. And if you're not compressing much, see in this case it was quite aggressive and it's bouncing around a lot. If I wasn't compressing much, perhaps the attached version would be useful too. So anyway, that's the end of our part 2 movie. And next up, we're going to bring in multiband and dive deep into that because that's where the real power of this Dynamics module lies. I'll see you there. And now we're going to have a look at the multiband aspects of the Dynamic module. In front of us now, we can see I'm set up for 4 bands. And let's have a look how we can get those to interplay with each other. Now, the color coding, as we've mentioned, is here. And I can select which band I want various ways. I can certainly just click into the display here, or I can click on these buttons here which match the color coding. So I want to go and play with band 1 or band 4. I can use this little link button here to link them together and do the same thing to more than one band. So the minute I do that, we're then moving things together. So that limiter ratio can go all the way to the bottom there. And when I check these other bands, limiter ratio is on the bottom there as well on all of those. So let's get some compression going across all bands now, and I can show you a few other things. So we'll get out of there and bring our limiter ratio back up there somewhere. That's fine. And I'll just play now and get some compression going. Now we are in link mode, so I'm doing this to all. Okay, now if we want to have an eye on the gain reduction that we're pulling at the moment, well, of course, we can switch our Dynamics options here and change from the histogram to the gain reduction. And now we can look at them one at a time, of course. So at the moment, we've got the lowest band selected. So we can see what we're doing there. I can click here, gain reduction in that band, gain reduction in that band, and the top band. But we can also change now the view up here to some benefit. So at the moment we're in that one, which is the crossover view. And now I can change to the gain reduction trace. So if I click here, we get this view now, but when I play, these dips are the gain reduction in that band. And you can see they're matching that. But I can switch this back to histogram now if I choose. Keep an eye on that, but keep the gain reduction view happening up top here. So there's gain 1, totally different because that's the bass, so it's really hitting too hard. Low mids, upper mids, and the highs. So that's a handy way of seeing what's going on as well. Now next up, I just want to mention that a lot of people refer to these multi-band tools as dynamic EQs, and that's a really good way of looking at it, I think, because they have benefits that EQs don't have. An EQ is a static device, so when you EQ something, that's how it is for the entire track. So there's no sensitivity to what's happening in the track. As opposed to something like this, where you can actually affect the tone of the track only depending on the type of program that's going into it at the time. A good example of that would be, say, de-essing, which we'll give a little example of in a few minutes. So first up, let's look at some other tricks we can do here now. We can copy and paste between these bands, as I think I've mentioned earlier on. So I can come here, I can copy those settings, I can come up to this end, and I can paste those settings onto that band. And now these two will match. As you've seen me do all through the tutorial so far, I can remove bands directly from here, or I can go into preference files for the crossovers and do it there, or specifically on any of these given plugins actually that support multiband. I can alter their number of bands directly from their preference there. Now, if you're looking at this so far and thinking it's a bit tedious or a bit difficult having to jump between bands here to see what's going on within each band, you may have noticed this little button here saying Show All. So I'll turn the link off there first. When I click Show All, we're going to lose this graphic display. So we lose that feedback, but in exchange, we get to see the parameters of every band for every submodule. So there we go. So now, in spite of the fact that we've lost that visual feedback, look what we've gained. Band 1, Band 2, Band 3, Band 4, and we've got limiter, compression, and gate on each one, plus makeup gain at the bottom here. So when I play now, we've got little mini histograms here on each one. And because we're unlinked, I can set my compression threshold there. I can look at each little histogram. So now I've used the peak of each little histogram mountain there and set the threshold right in the middle. So now I have a more consistent spread of threshold set, but yet the plugin is still operating totally independently. Now, even with these 4 little histograms, I can come into here and go to the dynamics options and change all of them to gain reduction meters. So now I've got 4 independent gain reduction meters. And perhaps this is what you might have been wanting to see. We can now monitor all 4 at the same time and make our adjustments accordingly. And makeup gain for each one at the bottom. So I just brightened that up. Again, normal bypass and solo options down here. There's my bypass. Let's push up the high mids a bit. Bypass. So push the brightness a bit hard there, but you get the idea. So now we've got complete control over virtually every parameter in this plugin, all in one window there. Now let's give some examples of how we can use this plugin effectively. I mentioned de-essing before, so let's have a look at that. I'm going to go straight to the presets here, and they've got a good de-esser ready to go for us, so we don't have to do much work. Now for de-essing, we need 2 bands or perhaps 3 bands. There's 2 different ways of looking at this. So that's assuming that we're not doing anything else with the plugin. If it's just being used for de-essing, then that's all we're going to need. So if we come along here and say de-ess vocal, okay, and I'll get out of there. So as you can see, this one's using 3 bands. So this will be a band that does nothing, the majority of it. Up here is that sensitive area where the S's occur, and they've zoomed in there. And over here are the higher frequencies beyond the essing area, which again will be untouched. So I'm going to jump over to a vocal here. Now, of course, the thresholds will all be wrong because they can't guess the level of my vocal. I'll go back to that vocal we were hearing before and have a listen.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
Now, see, to me, this vocal hasn't really got an S-ing problem yet, but it's a little bit dull in the upper mid. So in a modern pop production, there'd be a lot of boosting going on up there, and that's going to bring the S's out and create the problem, which you can hear there. There's a little bit of kind of chirpiness on the S's, but they're not too prevalent just yet. So what I would do now is tune the crossover by soloing the one in question and zooming in on that area that we're going to be looking at. So this preset's probably set a little bit too high for my liking on this girl anyway. So we'll find out. There. Even down a bit more. Okay, let's just say that's fine. What I would do now is actually boost that area. So that sounds odd, doesn't it? If we think we've got an S-ing problem, to actually turn that area up. But this is where you get the dynamic EQ principles. So it's this mustard band here we want to be working on. And so let's push the gain up first and exaggerate the area a little bit and also brighten it up, hopefully nicely.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
Okay, there we go.
But I can't find the words to say. So many times.
Okay, now we've really brought that area out. Now I'm going to drop the gate down there and we'll start clamping down with the threshold.
So many times I've tried to tell
you. Now we can see the S's triggering now, the gain reduction.
But I can't find the words to say.
So I'll go even further just to push it hard. So I'm now boosting that area, 10 dB, but then on the bits where she sticks out with the S's, it's going to clamp down on her.
So many times I've tried to tell you, but I can't find the words to say.
Now I'll push the very, very top as well, but there's no compression happening in that area.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
Okay, I'm going to widen this a little bit. There's still some S's poking through.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
Okay, now I'll bypass.
But I can't find the words to say.
Okay, let that first line come back around.
So many times I've tried to. So many times I've tried. So many times I've. So many times I've.
Okay, a little bit spitty, but you're getting the idea. It's actually brighter but less S-y than it was before. So if I bring that right down to like 4 or 5K.
So many times I've tried.
What is that?
So many times I've tried to tell you. So many times I've tried to tell you.
So a lot of options being displayed here. Now if we also compress some of the lower band, we can tighten up the vocal even more. And this is compressing it. It's very broad, as you can see that frequency there. So it's all the way from the very bottom up until the point where the S-ing starts.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
Ratio set to 1 there. So just realised why nothing was happening. Push that up to about a 4 and let's see what we get.
So many times I've tried to tell you, but I can't find the words to say.
Right, so we've got the two dancing together. A little bit more energy required there, maybe 2 dB.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
And our bypass.
But I can't find the words to say.
Okay.
So many times I've tried to tell you.
So that needs a little bit more fine tuning, but I think we've made the point there. We're dynamically altering that by boosting this area here, bringing out some of the brightness in her voice, except for the bits where the S's are hitting, in which case then we're clamping down on her voice to push those bits away. So it's working dynamically. It comes in when you need it and gets out of the way when you don't. Another option might be to take our track and to put more bass into it, but in a way that you can't do with an EQ by just turning up the bass. In this case, we'll put more controlled bass into it, so the end result will be a thicker, bigger bottom end in the track, but it will be controlled. And we'll do that by pulling up a standard 4-band setup And let's go to the presets and see if one can get us there quicker. Okay, rock dynamics I like. So I'll get out of there now, and that set us up. We're still in stereo mode here because I didn't want to do this with MS. Let's get these crossovers out of the way. And in fact, let's get the crossovers to be learnt via the learning system and see what it comes up with.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood quality, got the credibility, sweeter than...
Right, we saw what this does a couple of movies ago. Goes and very cleverly determines crossover points for us. Having said that, look where it's dropped that one, about 194. So that should be okay. That'll leave me a lot of thump at the bottom there. So what I'm going to do is switch back to the other mode. I'll just make sure there's no compression going on anywhere else. Just for this exercise, we want to deal with the bottom end. So I'm just pushing those thresholds of the compressor way up so they're out of the way. The track won't actually be able to catch them. Okay, so let's switch over to the low band specifically now and get out of this show all mode. So I'll do that and we'll work on this. Now let's have a look at what we've got so far. A compression ratio of 1.9. Let's even go a tiny bit higher. And have a listen. I'm going to solo that band out. Okay, that's the area that I want to work with. Now what we can do is make up more gain than we actually need. So we'll push that area a bit harder, but at the same time we'll be compressing it quite hard as well. So let's have a listen.
Shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood quality, got the credibility.
I'll bypass.
Sweeter than Ovaltine, got the placeability.
Okay, now what's happened though is the whole preset has things a little bit too hot. So to make this a bit easier, let's put everyone back to 0. So I'm going to do that. I'm option clicking just on this now to reset them back to 0. So all 4 bands back to 0, now back to here, and we won't be hitting the output of the plugin quite so hard. And now I'm going to make up more gain with just the bass.
Hollywood quality, got the credibility, sweeter than Ovaltine, got the placeability.
Okay, now let's bypass that.
Angelina, sizzling, bubbling, got man troubling, cause them walk into in. If a girl try to take your man, try to take your man, girl, you let them know.
Bit more perhaps.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood quality, got the credibility, sweeter than Ovaltine, got the placeability. Yeah.
So we're getting a bigger bass, but it's still totally controlled. It's not going to overshoot. It's not going to push us into the red with the whole program like an EQ would, which would be immediately overloading everything. So we are hitting the red here, but we can cater for that. And of course, a lot of this would be caught down the line later when we get to the maximizer, which is turned off at the moment.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood.
In fact, let's put the auto gain on for this band and see what happens.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood quality, got the credibility, sweeter than Ovaltine, got the placeability. Y'all body go down with the meaner, sweeter than Angelina, sizzling, bubbling, got man troubling, cause them walk into in. If a girl tryna take your man,
just see how far I can go up with this.
Cause you are the best girl, pose for the camera, girl, you are on the show. Strike up.
Okay, now bypass.
And you're sexy from your head to your toe.
So see how much thinner the bottom end is now? Back on. Now it's a little boomy, but there's certainly a lot more full down there. So if it was too boomy for us, we'd have to make some more adjustments and try and trim that back a little bit. But because we're in multi-band mode now, we can even do a little bit of kind of low-end gating with this part of the plugin here. So let's see what we can achieve with that, just to try and kind of clean up the rumble a bit. Okay, now I am pushing the threshold of the compressor higher, but listen to that. Now when we put that back in the track, it'll be a different texture again.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine.
So how's that? It's stopping and starting, but you're not hearing it like a gate that's out of control the same way, because the other 3 bands are passing through unharmed. So all the vocal and everything else is passing through fine, but it's the bass now that's doing that kind of gatey stop-start sound.
Physical therapy, body taking shape like them girl them in the magazine. Hollywood quality, got the credibility, sweeter than Ovaltine.
Yeah, bypass that.
y'all. Body good, with them in. Sweeter than Angelina. Sizzling, bubbling, got man troubling, cause them walk get you in. If a girl tryna take him, I try to take him.
So that gives you a good idea of some of the kind of weird textures you can come up with if need be, because by splitting the program into 4 frequency bands, you've got all this control. On top of that, we can split the 4 bands into an MS situation as well. So suddenly we've really got 8 different things we're dealing with. We're dealing with a mid and a side and 4 frequency bands of each. So there's plenty of control that you can activate. All right, well, that should just about do us for the dynamics module. I hope you got something out of that. And next up, we'll be diving into the stereo imaging module to get our mixes as wide and exciting as we can. And I'll see you over there. Next up here, we're going to look at the stereo imaging module. Now, stereo imaging plugins have been around for a long time, and a lot of the early ones sounded very phasey. So while they did in fact widen the image and give the illusion that the sound was coming almost like outside of the left and right speakers, the downside of that was a kind of a smeared image that lacked solidity in the center and wasn't always that nice to listen to be honest. But anyway, we've moved on a long way since those days, and more importantly about this one, of course, is that it's a multi-band stereo imaging module, and that in itself throws up a whole can of issues technically that iZotope have got around really nicely with Ozone 5, things to do with phase cohesion within the bands and that kind of thing. So this is a really, really nice sounding module, but most importantly, because it is multi-band, it's a lot easier to use it subtly and get a really good effect without the normal downside of this effect. Now, the biggest downside for me with this sort of effect ordinarily is in the bottom end. And down here, when you start widening this band around here, not only do you kind of lose the solidity of your kick and your bass, but the actual image gets very smeared and you can get that very strong out of phase sound. So what I love about the stereo imaging model in Ozone is that I tend to ignore this band and even a lot of this band and do all my work up here at the high end where it's more forgiving. You get that sparkle going out to the side of the speakers, but your bottom end can be quite solid and unharmed. And in fact, by moving these sliders down below 0, we can actually narrow the width in those frequencies. So that's the first thing you can see here. The normal position is 0%, and that's how things are by default. But we can actually go into the negative percentages down to 100, and of course positive percentages up to 100. So we can go maximum widening or maximum narrowing. So quite obviously, if I was to drag all 4 of these down to the bottom, our program, no matter how wide it was to start with, would then be in mono. Now let's have a little listen, and I'll start manipulating a few controls so you can hear the effect. So that's us dead flat. Now, as I said, I'm going to do the opposite of what I would normally do. Push up the bottom end and let's hear what happens. So now we've got that width down the bottom end. If I bypass, listen to the difference. Okay, I'll go back on again. So it's actually quite nice because those little toms that we're jumping at there are much, much wider, but they do have a kind of an out-of-phasey sort of sound to them. So some people don't really get offended by that out-of-phase sound. I'm one of those who do, but horses for courses. The only downside of that effect is that you lose a little bit of mono compatibility, which again, for some people is not even an issue in this day and age unless you're getting played on AM radio or in elevators or whatever. So I'll reset and we'll have a listen to the other bands. So pretty much this is just showing us where the energy is in the left and right spectrum. Now this vertical meter here is showing us the overall polarity of our program. As you're going to see, there's a whole number of ways of monitoring the width in Ozone 5. So with this one, we want to see the majority of the work being done sort of on the upper end of the scale here, or at least above the center point. And that shows us that our material is predominantly in phase. So we can see that, yep, most of the stuff's happening up there. So with that, we're happy. Now again, we'll have a better look at that in a minute when we get into some phase flipping. Now the other options of these views here are these two polar views. So there's this one. So it's like a little kind of spread there. Now with this view here, you can see this V outlined here. So this is kind of the safe area inside the V. Now anything outside that V falls into what's called the antiphase area. Now a little bit out there is not a bad thing at all. In fact, it can give our mix a sense of excitement and width, and that's something we do want. What we don't want to see is the majority of action happening outside this area. So with our mix here, it's fine, there's little bits out there, but we can see the sort of the majority of it's focused up the middle here with little spreads out the side. That's fine, we're happy with that. The third of these views is the polar L view there. Right, now this one, you can see little bits jumping out the side, but the majority's in there. Now every time I click, that'll reset it. So that's fine, happy with that. What we'll see in these views is that the moment I start pushing up these bands here to create more width, we're going to get a lot more activity happening in this anti-phase zone. So most notable will be the base one, so I'll do that. Right, so now as I push that up, getting a lot more happening down here. Now this is not reacting to frequency at all, this graph. This is only reacting to the phase across the board, but these base ones are more notable. So they're the ones that are causing the issue. Same would occur if I push this up. Okay, now this whole time we've been in this phase mode. I'll jump over to channel mode here, which gives us a few more controls down here. So just to revisit this vertical meter here, watch what happens as it is now. Now here we have the option to invert the right or the left to immediately put things out of phase. Now watch this meter. It's now diving down, and of course this one down here is all about the sides now. So if you ever see anything that looks like that, panic straight away if that's not your deliberate intention, because things are out of phase here. So that shows us that these controls here invert either the left or the right. So that's all out of phase now. We're back in. Again, that's out of phase. If I put them both out of phase, then we've reversed the absolute polarity of our program, which means the sound to us will be in phase and sound fine and look fine, but we've actually reversed both left and right. So generally you would not want to do that unless you were correcting for some sort of problem. It's very hard to hear that with your naked ears because things are in phase, in absolute phase anyway. This control here will swap the left with the right if they've become mixed up for some reason along the way in your production. So again, hard to hear unless you've got specific things in the left and right. So it still sounds like a normal stereo program. And here we've got the all useful mono switch. So we're in mono there, as you can hear. So we can use the standard trick here of if we invert that and we're now out of phase, if I mono things, we're going to lose pretty much everything. So our entire stereo signal has virtually disappeared. And that's the warning that if a program with predominantly out-of-phase information gets released out into the wild and then gets in a mono environment, like some internet radio stations, I guess, or AM radio, things like that, when they collapse to mono, that's what you're going to hear. So you're going to go from this and end up with that when it goes onto the radio. So that's why mono compatibility is always a bit of an issue in the back of our minds. Now if I put it back in phase but leave the mono in, everything comes back. So beware. So this is with the channel switch on here. If we put the phase switch on here, as we started with, that gives us just this rotation control, which is very subtle. And what it does is actually alters slightly the phase alignment between the left and right channels, up to about 90 degrees. So if I do this now on the program, you probably won't hear much difference on this particular program. Now I'm hearing a slight change. Things get a little bit wider. So I'll put it all the way on. I'll switch it on and off from here. I'm hearing a tiny bit of width, but it's not much to it in this case. You might be able to use this as a correction tool if there's been some sort of phase alignment issues in your track that are subtle, like not complete phase, just minor things like maybe room mics that aren't working in a certain way. You could use that in a mix situation. Now over here, the offset control is an interesting one. This gives us now 4 delay lines on our bands. Now what these delay lines are delaying though are the left to the right. So that gives us the power to mess with the effect that we have where whichever side gets to your ear first is going to appear louder. So even if the left and the right are exactly at the same volume, if the signal on the left hits your ears first, it's going to sound louder. So knowing that phenomenon, we can adjust things in here. Now at the moment, they're all linked. So whatever I do to one will take all 4 bands at once. But have a listen to this phenomenon. We've got a mix here which generally feels quite centered. We're not doing any stereo widening from here. And that's changing the split between the left and the right now. And the right sounds a bit louder to me. Now if I go the other way, now the left feels louder because we're delaying the right. So given that phenomenon, let's put them all back to 0. If we unlink the bands, the ability to do that is cool for certain situations, but now we can do it on a 4-band basis, so it's even more powerful. So we can delay just, say, the top end here. Or I'll do the high mids, which are more audible. So now the left is a bit louder in the upper frequencies, but the bottom end is still deadly center. I'll go the other extreme. Now it's a bit louder on the right. So cute little trick that. Could be very useful for tidying up balance problems inside an existing mix if need be. Okay, next thing to look at is our graph area up here. Now at the moment we're in the standard crossover view that we've seen in the other modules, but now we've got these other options as well. We've got the stereo spectrum view, and what this does is shows how wide we are spread in each band. So I'll play again. So it's showing us how wide the bands are independently. So if I pull them all down to 0, we're going to end up with a straight line. Down to -100, should I say. We're going to end up with a pretty much a straight line. So you can see what's happening there. It's getting narrower. There we go. It's a straight mono signal now with no width. So if I let a little bit of this one creep back in, now you can see it spreads out also into the other bands as well because the crossovers aren't kind of razor sharp. They're blending down. So we're getting a little bit of that width spreading over. So I'll put them all back on 0. And let's go wide up here, as I probably would normally. Bypass the whole module. So you can see it creates quite an excitement to the mix as well. Okay, so that's the spectrum view, and down here we've got the correlation trace, and what this will do is allow us to actually see when our width is in positive phase or negative phase. So I'll put everything back to reset here and play. So it's very similar to this vertical meter here. It's showing us that when things are above the line, that's generally a good sign, and when things are below the line, not such a good sign unless that's an intentional effect. But the beauty of this is that it can do it on a per band basis. So now if I push this one up, now we've got a few things creeping under the line there. If I, again, do it with the bass one, it'll be much more obvious. So I can hear it coming in out of phase now, the bottom end, and there's some proof of it there. Do that one as well. So it's warning us out of phase information happening. And even this meter here now, while predominantly in the positive zone, we're still getting a lot going under there. Plus this one here is throwing things off to the side. So as you can see, Ozone 5's got this whole host of meters all kind of giving us different warnings of pretty much the same thing, but different ways of seeing the same information. So that's the stereo imaging module, and next up we're going to tackle the maximizer. And now we move on to the last of the Ozone modules, the maximizer module. Now that's what you can see in front of you here, and the maximizer module is broken up into two parts. It's the peak limiting section here, so that's this area here which borders up and down that border there, and to the right here is the dithering module, which we'll cover in the next movie. So at the moment we're going to deal with just the limiting module, which is this little area through there. Now, digital peak limiters have come a long way in recent years, and that's kind of a curse and a blessing. The curse part is because of the loudness wars that have been going on in music for the last 15 years or so, and that is the war to just make tracks louder and louder and louder at the expense of all their dynamics, but even worse than that, at the expense of creating sometimes quite ugly and horrible distortion in the tracks just to make the tracks sound louder. Now, thankfully, that process seems to be waning a little bit in recent years, which is great, but we still need these intelligent limiters to get tracks to have a certain punch. And that's the other thing that's happened in recent years, is that the digital limiter has gone from being purely like an insurance policy that sat there to stop things from going over zero. Now they're turned into sound shaping tools in their own right. High-end mastering engineers for years have been deliberately clipping the front end of their expensive analog processors for sound. Well, now a lot of these digital processors have got algorithms in them to simulate that effect as well. And Ozone 5 is one of those. So let's just have a look at the interface now and you'll see what I mean. Down here are the 5 different modes that are available to us. So IRC is the name of iZotope's proprietary intelligent release control. So initially their first limited design had the IRC mode in it, and since then it's been upgraded to the IRC2, and just for Ozone 5 now we've got the IRC3. Now each one is an incremental update from the previous one, but there's still value in using the older ones if you want, because they all have different sounds and will be suitable for different things. So these are the 3 intelligent released base limiters, and then after that we have a fixed hard design and we've got a fixed soft design. Now all but the soft are true peak limiters in that we can set our margin here, which we'll do in a second, and the signal will not exceed that point. You can't get through. So once you've made that hard roof, that is that. The exception is this soft model here, which when pushed hard enough, the signal will exceed the margin. So you're not getting a true digital safe limiter from that. So you would use that one down at lower levels more as a sound or effect, but not as a fixed safe limiter like the others. So the controls here are the threshold, which basically turns up the audio by your desired amount. So I'll run this track into it now and you'll see what I mean. Now as I pull this down, the track will get louder. And you can see on the meters here I'm pushing more and more level in because that's our output meter getting louder and louder. So that's the threshold. Here is the margin, also known as the ceiling in many ways, because that's the point at which we're saying no level should go beyond this. So you'd want to set this not usually at 0, even as though theoretically 0 is stopping things going through the roof. With these things, if you're going to push them a little bit hard, it's nice to leave a tiny bit of room just in case. So usually 0.3 is not a bad place to go. And if you're working on things like broadcast, those guys sometimes have it down at like -8 or -10, depending on what the television station requirements are. So a lot of the time you would actually set it right down there and then do all your normal work and limit the final product there. But for CD or MP3 based music, you want it up here. For MP3 specifically, they can often let you down in some areas, so you want to leave a little bit of room for those. So 0.3, 0.4, even a bit lower sometimes if need be. So sticking to 0.3 now, we're making that our fixed ceiling, and then we'll work the threshold with that in mind. Now here we've got a slider which actually changes its meaning depending on which mode we're in here. So for the IRC-based mode, the intelligent modes, it's just a character knob, but even then it has different meanings depending which mode we're in. So at the moment, the character for IRC 1, the initial algorithm, at the moment it says transparent, but as I move this up or down, you'll see that change. So up here, it's very, very slow. It's mainly referring to the release constant of the limiter, how quickly it lets go of things. So if you're trying to get something very, very loud, like pop music type loud, very, very slow is not really going to help you because it's going to be too sluggish. You'll probably hear it pumping a little bit. Like I'll run this track into this now and I'll start driving it quite hard with this threshold, with that in very slow mode, and you'll hear that when the going gets tough, it'll actually start slowing down too much. So you can hear it ducking out of the way. So every time a hard drum hits, it takes too long for the sound to get back to loud again. So it's actually ducking out of the way. We definitely wouldn't want that for this sort of music. So sliding down here, we've gone from very slow to transparent, to smooth, fast and loud, and then, very fast, and then clipping. So now we've got that clipping I was talking about being sort of simulated in the digital environment. Now, it's not going to be really clipping in the sense that it's going to overload our program, but it will clip the waveform. But the funny thing is, ordinarily, that would be a bad thing. Sometimes that can be a very pleasant thing, especially in modern pop music when you want that crunchy kind of character. Now, if you were working on a lovely jazz or classical-based piece, you certainly wouldn't be wanting to clip. But in pop music, that's often exactly what you do want these days. So I'm going to put that now at the clipping stage, which is this mode's fastest point. And let's hit this a bit hard and hear what happens. Now it's distorting a little bit now. I mean, I'm hitting that mighty, mighty hard, and it is distorting a little bit. I'll take this out of the histogram view that we're in now and move it back to the gain reduction view so you can see exactly what's going on with the gain reduction. Like at that level I was at now. I mean, no wonder it's destroyed. It's being smashed to death. So I'll just bring it back up a bit. There we go. So I'm hitting that pretty hard. Now if I slide this up to slow, it just doesn't smack you in the face the way it was before. And quickly jumping ahead, you can see here up on our trace, which is the gain reduction trace, that when the gain reduction comes down in this fast mode, have a look, it's just like a little snap down. When I slow it down, right, you can see the recovery is like this diagonal. So we're getting a graphic readout of exactly what we're hearing, that slow recovery, which just won't work with this sort of music. So that's the IRC1 algorithm. IRC2, very similar. We've got the same character options here, but this one is optimized to sound even better. It's a later release. Technology marches on, and this one will have even more tolerance to push things and not distort. So let's have a listen to. Okay, that's pretty crazy loud, and it sounds not too bad for this style of music. So I haven't got a big problem with that just now. I'll just have another quick listen. Let's bypass. Not too bad. I know a lot of people are quite happy with that algorithm and have done some really good work with it. But new for Ozone 5 is the IRC3 algorithm. So let's hit that one and we'll see that this character slider will change some of its definitions now. Okay, now this new balanced switch has come in here, and these are actually more algorithms we can choose from within that algorithm. So the options there are balanced, crisp, or clipping. So we had clipping before, and pumping. Right, so we had clipping before on this slider. Now we've just got this slider here going between slow and fast based on those 4 algorithms there. So even more depth of control. So again, if absolute crunchy loudness was our goal, Maybe it shouldn't be always, but for this song, let's say it is. Let's try crisp and quite fast and see what we can get.
Quick. Take it to the tip. Ride it to the deck. Show them off the strip. Exploring your body, girl, just handle us.
Okay, I can hear it fighting back a little bit. What's the next one? Clipping. And we'll try that with quite fast and maybe even speed it up a little bit. Okay, we'll slow it down. I can actually hear the limiter now putting some of its own personality into the program. And that's what a lot of these limiters are doing these days now. They're not just being invisible in the background. They can be invisible and in the background, but now they're actually bringing some character to the party as well. And sometimes that's a really cool thing. It can take a track that's sounding a little bit flat, not quite there, and actually give it a little bit more vibe and excitement at the mastering stage. So definitely something you might want to experiment with. Now, hard and soft, we talked about briefly before. Hard now has just a fixed release in milliseconds, and same with soft. Now, that's cool for some things, but if your goal is maximum loudness with minimum artifacts, then definitely the IRC algorithms are the ones you want to go to because they have intelligent release. The release time internally is moving itself around all the time based on the program that it's receiving. These ones here are kind of more old school limiters in that the release time is fixed. It doesn't matter what the music's doing, it's going to react exactly the same way no matter what it sees. So that's kind of cool for a certain sound, but it's not intelligent like the other algorithms are. So still, you can get some reasonably good results, especially with the hard one, because it's got that hard knee that's going to really stop things hard to give you quite an aggressive sound if that's what you want. So I'll have a quick listen to that. But you can hear straight away, it's not quite up to it like the other algorithms were, at that level anyway. Too fast? Yeah, it could be useful for some things, but not for a full mastering thing like this when compared to how good these ones sound. Because you can hear it now, it's kind of struggling, it's clamping on, but it's not really giving and taking like these ones were, where they're letting some things through and then blocking others to give that more exciting sound. Now down here we have the option for intersample detection, and that's unavailable in these algorithms, but is available on these ones. Now, intersample detection is a kind of clever way of the program to estimate what's going to happen when the signal goes back into the analog world, when it goes out through a D to A converter, and how it's going to react. And sometimes even as though we might set our margins here and we'll say nothing's going to go beyond 0.3 dB and we think we're safe. Well, in most respects we are, but sometimes when that signal is reconstructed back into the analog world by a digital to analog converter, in certain situations like on cheap CD players, there can be distortion added with components that aren't up to it. So what you can do is turn this on, and then you can be guaranteed there's absolutely no peaks that are going to get through in that situation. It'll add a slightly higher DSP requirement to your system, and in my experience, it can take some of the excitement away if you're going for that crunchy pop sound, because it limits that, it holds that in. And so while it's giving you this absolute security that nothing's going to overload, it does take a little bit of the vibe away. And let's have a quick listen and see if we can prove that. I'm in clipping now up here. We'll speed that up a little bit. Let's see what we've got normally. Now, acknowledging that I am hitting things pretty damn hard here, and so we are doing some damage, but that's a sound we're going for, let's say. Now, if I hit the intersample detection, let's see what changes. Actually, in that case, I think it made things sound a little bit cleaner. It kept most of the loudness the same and cleaned it up in many ways. So I would definitely leave it in that test. In other tests I've done, it hasn't necessarily sounded better. It might be better scientifically at the other side, but in this case, it's better for both. So definitely a keeper that time. Now let's have a look at our trace up here as we did before. Now we've seen the gain reduction trace, so here we go there. It's showing us our gain reduction there. This is cool in a way too, because if we go out of this mode, back into histogram there, then we lose our gain reduction meter there, but still we can use this here as a guide. And also very subtly down here in red, that's the peak gain reduction that we're getting. It's just disappeared now, but as soon as I play, that'll come back again. That's showing us the highest gain reduction amount since the last time we hit play. So there it is there. So even as though we can't see the gain reduction here, we've got it there and we've got it up here. And then we can set our threshold using the histogram. But we'll move off that one now and down here into the standard spectrum view that we've seen in other modules. So that's just that showing us the spectrum display of the waveform. And this third one here we'll cover in more detail in the dither tutorial that's coming up next. This shows us the dither shape. Now right now, because dither's turned off, it's just flat. So we'll look at that in more detail in the next movie. Now one more thing, I'll go back there. You can see now, let's say we're happy with that, but we want to compare to our previous bypassed level. Well, if I hit bypass now, of course, because the very nature of what we're doing here is turning things up very loud, the bypass level is going to be very soft. So I turn that off, turn it back on. So it's kind of hard to make any sensible judgments from that because one's much louder and a little bit more distorted and more exciting. The other one's less exciting, but much, much softer. So hard to compare. If we come over here to the I/O and right click in that area, we can pull up the I/O options, or of course we could have just clicked on options here and gone to I/O. One of the I/O options here is to actually add a fixed amount of gain when the plugin is bypassed. So we can say when I hit bypass, add X amount to what I'm hearing. But even more kind of intelligent than that, down here we can automatically match the effective gain. So if I turn that on and then OK that box, now when I hit bypass, the plugin will make up intelligently what I've added in this limiting algorithm. So let's play now. Okay, we want to hear what it sounds like bypassed. Bypass version. So straight away we can actually hear if we're doing damage that we're not happy with or actually improving the track. And the final element of the limiter section is this stereo link control over here. Now this is only usable in the IRC modes. So you'll see if I click on the hard and the soft, it kind of totally grays out and I can't access it. So that's no good. But in IRC 1, 2 or 3, I can click on here and activate this. Now what this simply does is allows us to break the limiting detection algorithm off. So it deals with the left and the right independently by an amount that we set here. So ordinarily, limiting is applied equally to both the left and the right. So that is, if a really loud sound appears, say, in the left-hand side and pushes the limiter into gain reduction, the left and the right side will both be affected by this. Whereas if we have a 100% unlinked system here, then if a really peaky sound appears in the left-hand side, just the left-hand side will react to this and the right-hand side will pass through unharmed. So it's kind of hard to demonstrate with a program material that is relatively balanced left and right, but we can still activate things here. So first of all, we'll turn on the stereo link function here and then we can disable the amount of linkage. So this way, it's as we had it now. We are 100% stereo linked, so it's the same as having it off effectively. But down here, we can break the amount of linkage down to 0%. So let's see if we can hear a difference under some heavy limiting here. So now I'll pull this down. I'm not detecting too much difference, but where this could be useful is in pop tracks where perhaps there is lots of left and right differentiation, but not crazy stuff like, massive bass notes appearing in one side but not the other. But when you've got a normal wide stereo mix, it could be nicer to have this unlinked and let the two work at the same time. The downside is that there may be a little break in the phase cohesion because the two sides are moving independently, but that could be a cool thing too. It could actually make the track sound even wider and more exciting. And as long as the track is not out of control, doing silly things, it could be a really nice effect to have these guys unlinked or maybe just, 50% unlinked or something like that. So a useful control to use, and it'll take up a little bit more CPU as well. So if you've got the room to add this, please do. Because have a look up here now, I've got 20, 22, 23% there. Now if I turn this mode off altogether, Okay, now it just drops us down to sort of 2019. If I go back to IRC1 instead of IRC3, there we go. So we drop right down to 9 or 10. So as you can see, as the intelligent algorithms get improved here, we add extra features over here. It all has a hit on the CPU. But in a mastering context, as I am here with this one plugin only in there, you've certainly got the room to do it, then do it. Yeah, if it makes things sound better, definitely use it. That's always the rule. Because the other thing here is the intersample peak detection too. If I take that out, there we go. Now we drop right down to 3%. So we could be using this limiter in its basic mode at 3% here, or we can throw the book at it, so to speak, do the most kind of intelligent, high-powered algorithms here, and bing, we're back up to 23, 24%. So just by activating a few switches. So keep your eye on those things. Make sure you're not getting any glitches or dropouts due to CPU overload. In this case, we're working well under the radar, so that's cool. So that's it for talking about the limiting section of the maximizer. And next up, we'll dive right into this dithering area over here and cover these controls. So now we move on to the dither module, which is this area beginning from there and finishing there. Now, while the dither module does appear inside the maximizer module here, it actually isn't directly related, only in so much as it follows on from the limiting process. But the dithering module is independent of the limiter. So this fella here can be on, over here this guy can be off, and it will still function. And in fact, that here can be off, but as you can see, when I turn that off, that all grays out, but the dithering module itself is still lit up. So the dithering is independent of the limiting process, if you will. So that's important to know, because the chain of things in the whole plugin here is that at the very end of the line, all these modules happen first, of course, so your equalizers, reverbs, and you can adjust those limits. Ideally, the limiter should be the last of these kind of processing modules in the chain. Now, there is the ability here under the graph option there to make the loudness maximizer, happen right there. Now, it's possible to do that. I don't know why you would want to do that. And ideally, the maximizer should be the last of the processing modules that your music passes through, except for dithering. So just to summarize, you've got all your main modules, your EQs, your reverb, loudness maximizer now at the end. That's last. Then it hits the output gain here. So it is actually technically possible to then, once you've done maximizing here, to turn the output gain down. Now, ideally, I wouldn't be doing that ever. I'd be leaving that locked to 0, and your ceiling here is setting the maximum output level, your margin control there. But anyway, you've got your output gain there. Then we head into this DC offset filter here, and from the DC offset filter, we hit the dithering, and then we're out. Nothing else is to touch the audio. And that's the important thing to understand about dithering. It needs to be the last thing that happens before your audio goes out into the world. It's not supposed to go through any other kind of process, volume change, transformation of any sort after that. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you're asking the question, it's very well to talk about this, but what is dithering? And put simply, dithering is an injection of very low-level noise that's put across your signal to mask the nasty effects that occur when you normally change bit depths. So dithering is something that you need to put on every time you are reducing the bit depth of your program. So in the case of me now here in Pro Tools, I'm running a 24-bit session. We're mixing in a 64-bit environment in Pro Tools these days with plugins that are handing 32-bit audio off to each other and so on. So what I want to do though at the end is output a 16-bit file to make, let's say, a CD. So in spite of the fact that I'm operating at all these very high bit depths, my desired final output is going to be 16 bits. So that being the case, we're going to be throwing dynamic range or detail away. We have to, because we're going from such a large bit depth down to a smaller one. So in order to do that, the last thing we want to do is just lop off those bottom bits and just have them truncate away, because at the very, very low point there, there's still audible information down there that we want to preserve. So instead of just like scissoring them off and throwing them away, we apply dither to those bottom bits, or bottom 1 or 2 bits in this case. And while that might seem kind of odd, why are you going to inject noise in when you're sort of trying to prevent noise generally? Well, that's true, but the noise is definitely the lesser of the two evils when you hear what the other evil sounds like. And we'll give a little demo of that shortly. But now that we've had a little overview, let's just go through what these settings are all for. So this vertical section here is all to do with the dithering itself. So there's different types of dithering here. Now, mbit plus is Ozone's kind of house dither, shall we call it that. It's the boutique dither that iZotope have made, and under most circumstances it would be my choice. I'm not really I suppose what you'd call a dither snob. So when iZotope say this is a really, really good dither, I'm inclined to just believe them and go with that. But if you want to explore a little deeper, there's things we can do. So I'll turn this module back on so we light up here. Now, as we mentioned in our limiting tutorial, this option here shows me the dither noise shape. So at the moment we've got a flat line because dithering is on but not really activated down here. Dither amount is none. So I'll just put a bit of dither in. I'll turn that up, low. Okay, that's normal. Now, at the moment we're at 24 bits here, so no dithering is being applied. As soon as we say we want to come down to 16 bits, which is what we would be doing if we were outputting a master for CD. There's 8, there's 16. And now let's apply some shaping here. Right, now, so as you can see, as I go through these noise shaping variants, this curve here is changing in shape. So dithering is the injection of the noise, and noise shaping is a special process that takes that noise and tries to force it into an area where the ear is less sensitive, so we won't actually notice it as much. So it's an interesting phenomenon. We're trying to inject noise and then we're trying to kind of move it out of the way so it doesn't bother us too much. Now understand, this noise I'm talking about is happening down very, very, very low. And in order for us to listen to it soon, we're going to have to do some radical moves. So this audio is very, very low at the bottom end of the audio spectrum. It's the two kind of most insignificant bits in our 16-bit word. It's right down the bottom. So in loud pop music, we're not even getting down to that area. We're not going to hear it. Perhaps on a reverb fade out or on a tail at the end of a song, we could be getting down there if we've got things turned up really loud. So don't get concerned that we're dealing with something that's right in your face. It's all very subtle. So this is where we choose the dithering algorithm. So as I said, we've got iZotope's M-bit plus there. Then we've got another one called type 1. Another one called type 2. Now we're not going to go into great detail as to the differences between these. It gets very scientific and it's quite academic on some levels, but we can still blow things up and hear the differences for ourselves. So I'm going to leave it on M-bit there. Let's put this back to the noise shaping of none. So as we've discussed, different levels of noise shaping. The bit depth is the resolution that we want our output file to be at. Now just keep in mind that's not going to change what comes out of, in my case, Pro Tools today. The bit depth of the file that comes out of Pro Tools boils down to what I set in my bounce options or when I'm outputting my file myself. So all this will do is produce a 16-bit master, but that master could still be inside a 24 or 32-bit file depending on what I do. So at some stage you have to create that final 16-bit file yourself. Now you might do it in one take from bouncing out of Pro Tools or Logic or whatever you're using, or you may have to take your 24-bit master and turn it into a 16-bit master with no further dithering. That's the other thing you have to be careful of. Once you've applied the dither once, do not apply it again via some other program. That final master needs to be treated as the absolute final master. So moving further down, that was the bit depth, and here we've got the dither amount, and this is how much of that noise we're going to inject. Down here, a couple of other options in relation to the dither. Auto blanking is sort of like a noise gate in that if there's no program running for about 0.7 seconds, the dither itself will be turned off. So it's only going to function when there's program there for it to work with. Under here, limit peaks. These two last options are getting a little bit too esoteric even for me, I think. So this one here, as you can see from the pop-up help, suppresses spurious peaks of high frequency shaped noise. Fair enough. I'm not too sure how much influence that's going to have, but we can switch that in if need be. This one down here won't come on until we change to type 2 here of the dithering. And now we've got harmonic suppression, and pertinent only to that type 2 dither that can move harmonic quantization noise up into a different range, similar to how noise shaping attempts to move the whole dither up beyond our hearing. So I'm going to go back to M-bit and quickly now move on to the DC offset meter, which is a phenomenon that occurs usually in the analog domain where bits of DC offset can get into your files and result in low frequency information, which is inaudible in many ways. It can be right down super low, 10 Hertz and below. And what that can do is eat up headroom in your track, which can result in you not being able to get things as loud as you want because this invisible bottom end is eating up the headroom. So in order to prevent that, we can put on this real-time DC filter here. Now that again takes a little bit of extra DSP. So where are we there? We're about fluctuating 1920. If I turn on the real-time DC filter, it only creeps up a tiny bit. Okay, that's fine. So now when I play, we can see this meter moving here, but we can be comfortable in the fact that the DC is being filtered out and things are being reset. So we can see the movement there, but that's fine. Now more fun is this little gadget here, which is a bit meter. And this is a clever little thing that shows us the movement of the bits in our stream here. So we can measure at any time the number of bits that are being activated, even if we can't actually hear any difference. So right now we can see 16 is flashing here. And when I play, everything is happening above that. So it says to us, we're hearing 16 bits of audio at the moment. So we must be dithering down to a 16-bit, and there it is right there. So if I go back to 24, we can now see that when I play, we're getting dancing all over the entire spectrum. Now, for a technical reason, we're not going to see anything on the very, very top one. And the reason for that is beyond my understanding, but apparently it's been put in there just for the sake of completeness. But the actual top bit we need to worry about is the second top one here. So that's the most significant bit. That's what MSB stands for. Down the other end is least significant bit. So right now we have some dithering on, so we can see a little bit of noise happening down here. Now, just these 4 columns to understand what they are. The 2 inside ones are the left and right kind of peak metering, so to speak. They're showing us what's going on and off immediately. And the left and the right outside ones are kind of like peak hold. They're the ones that are holding information of things that have happened recently. But don't think of them as peak meters the same way we look at these meters over here. They're not showing volume up and down like these guys are. What they're doing is showing which bits are being switched on and off in our program, and it's a different way of thinking about it. But it's not something we have to concern ourselves with unless it's showing us things that we don't expect. Like, for instance, if the 12th bit here wasn't lighting up. So we can see action on every single one here. If, for example, one of them was not lighting up for some reason, that could be pointing to a problem with a plugin or an A to D converter, or something in your chain may have messed up. But ordinarily, as long as the number of bits you're seeing corresponds to what's getting fed in there, things should be fine. So right now, because we've got some dither going on, and we'll bring it back to 16-bit, we can see these bits being activated there. Now, just something about these other dithers, not the M-bit plus, but the next one here. This one has the option to have number of bits. So this is saying only 1 bit, the very bottom one, the least significant bit of the 16, is going to be used for dither. I can choose to have 2 here, so the bottom 2 bits get used for dither as well. So with this algorithm, we have a choice of how many get used, and that's the same with the type 2. But I'll go back to my M-bit one. So now that we've had a little look at the dithering, the DC offset filter, and the bit meter, let's have a listen to what the sound of all this actually is. Now, the only way I'm going to be able to do that is to significantly limit what we're hearing. So what I'm going to do is pull this right down. So I'm pulling the input to the plugin crazy low, and I have to pull the output of the plugin crazy low as well. Now, I'm going to be turning up this in post-production so you guys can hear what's going on, because it's going to be very, very quiet at this level, but I'll turn it up during the editing and you'll be able to hear exactly what's going on. So now if I play, let me just turn off everything for a start. So this is no dithering. Okay, so I've got that nice and soft now. Now that all sounds fine. All I've done is taken my 24-bit master and turned it down. If I now turn on the dithering, but down here for dither amount, say none. So I've now got 0 dithering. So I've now got dithering on, but it's not doing anything because its amount is none. There's no noise shaping. And now I turn my whole program to 8-bit. So now I'm saying, give me an 8-bit output, but use no dithering. Let's hear what that sounds like. Now that, my friends, is the sound of quantization. So there's not enough bits in our audio stream to represent the music, and everything else is being thrown off the bottom. So that's all that's left. We're only hearing probably 2 bits of audio. So that's what's left over. That's quantization noise, and that's what's ugly. Now, of course, normally our music doesn't sound like that, but down at the very, very soft levels, that's kind of what's going on if we don't dither. Okay. So now let's inject some dither into that. So I'll say dither amount. Right, so now we've got some hiss in there. Now what's the magic about dither is that even as though that hiss is obviously ugly and not a nice thing to listen to, we're kind of hearing more of the music now suddenly, aren't we? It actually sounds like less of that music is being thrown away. It's kind of a smoother representation. So I'll keep going. Now I'll up this from low to normal. And listen to that music now. It's actually not choppy anymore. And that's high. So let's go back to normal, and now let's turn up the noise shaping with this. Okay, now you can see this curve here representing what the noise shaping is doing. Bit more. Bit more. And now that track to me sounds, you know, smooth like it normally was. And we can see here the number of bits that are being stimulated is only really 2 or 3. So we're looking at a dynamic range of about 12 dB there at the most when we flick onto that third bit. So 8 is the base one there, and we're flicking up maybe 1 or 2 lights above that. So we're hearing basically 3 bits of audio. So try again. Now I'll change the dithering type to a different one. Alright, so this one very noisy. That's 1 bit being used, and this is the reason why you might want to use more than 1. Even 1 bit there, it's a bit choppy and gatey sounding. But then 2 bits, while being noisier, has smoothed out the audio. Noise shape that. Noise shape that. If I put on auto blanking now, you'll hear, as soon as I hit stop, it turns off after a little while when it realises there's no music. Then as soon as the music starts again, on it comes. So that's auto blanking. Type 2, different sound again you can hear. So suddenly dithering takes on a whole new importance when you're down at that level, which of course we generally never are. But in order to hear what goes on down there, we have to do the David Attenborough and blow things up like this. So under normal circumstances, all I recommend you do, put yourself back at a normal level and run this guy probably most of the time on the M bit and just take the defaults. So maybe light or moderate, let's say there, 16 bit is what we're normally outputting to, and a normal amount of dithering. And it's going to sound fine. And here we've got 16 bits going on, and we know we're healthy. DC filter on, just in case. And we're going to have a perfectly good master coming out of there. So that's the dithering submodule of the maximizer module. I hope you got something out of that, and I'll see you in the next movie. Now, while as we've been going along, we've been having a look at the options for each module, we haven't really had a decent look at the General Options tab here, which has a lot of options we can go through. So we'll quickly run through these now and see what they do. So down here on the left column, this is pretty much mostly to do with graphics, as is labelled up there. So we'll start at the top. Enable meters enables you to turn off the metering in both the spectrums and the main meters over here. So right now, if I play with the meters on, now I can click on this and metering will stop. So that's that one. Over here, show tooltips. As you can see now, just by hovering over that, we're getting a tooltip explaining what that tool is for. So same thing, wherever I go, little instruction thing pops up explaining what that tool is for. This simply just turns that off so that doesn't happen. So now, if those things annoy you, you can turn them off. Third up, enable animation. And I better say, similar to the first one, like why you would want to turn off the meters, apart from the fact that perhaps they might be annoying you visually, most of this stuff is to do with CPU usage. So if at any stage you think the movement of the meters is interfering with your computer, perhaps you're on a fairly old computer that's struggling to keep up, you can do all these little things that can conserve power. But for any computer in the last 3 or 4 years, you should be fine with most of these functions switched in. But just in case, we need to cover them. So enable animation refers to all the nice little animations that happen when boxes are popping up and down. So when I close this box, see it's a nice little animation. When I open up options again, kind of does this nice little zoom and pop up. So I can turn those off entirely just to save a tiny bit more power. So now when I close, just a flat thing. When I open it up, just a boring open like that. So your choice. Enable animated focus. This is operating when I'm using the keyboards to zoom around the interface here. Now, if I click on, say, that one there, now that I've made that kind of active in this box, if I use my enter key on my keypad, I can turn that back on. Now see, when I do that, these little white brackets appear around the option just to show me which one's active. So if I don't want those, I can disable them with this control here. Now here, show screen glare. This is just a subtle visual thing. When I turn this on and off, you'll be able to see on the display here just some of the lighting effects that have been used in the creation of the graphic interface will dim off. So you can just see the whole thing backs off a little bit. So that's off, on, off, on. So purely a visual thing there. Now, frame rate limiter, again, this is to do with CPU usage. The default is 30 frames per second. This is how smooth or how liquid the meters are over here. So let's run that. So you can see things are quite smooth. There's no kind of jerking around of the movement of those meters. If I'm having trouble with my CPU usage, I can slow down the amount of frames being used here, and I'll get more power to the computer at the exchange of having the meters a bit more sort of blocky. So let's look at that. So it just doesn't look quite as smooth. And the other extreme, if I go much, much higher, now they're sort of ultra smooth. So I find the recommended version of 30 pretty fine. I haven't got a problem with the accuracy of the metering at that level. So that's a fair compromise. This one here, opacity, is disabled on my host, which is Pro Tools running RTAS, but on some other hosts, it enables you to control the opacity or transparency, if you like, of the plugin. So it can actually float there and you can see through it and see other things, but it doesn't work on Pro Tools here. The brightness control here, another visual one, just lets you change the display of the plugin there, as you can see. So perhaps you might find darker is better. I'm okay with it on 0, so I'll leave it like that. Now, dimming the controls when bypassed. You've noticed that when I bypass a module, the module kind of all goes grayed out and it's fairly obvious that those controls are unavailable. So just a quick example of that. Here's the equalizer module now. If I bypass that, you can see it all kind of whites out there, and I quite like that. Lets me know exactly what's going on. If for some reason you don't like that, you can turn off that control there. And now when I bypass, it doesn't do that. The bypass light, of course, is a bright flashing red there, letting me know something's on. But personally, I prefer the more aggressive approach of really dimming the module out. And just on that again here, solo bypass indicator, and your choice is the blinking that we just saw there. So when I go into bypass, it's a blinking red light, or the solo is a blinking blue light. So back into bypass. The option is, instead of blinking, I can have it as a solid light instead. So now I've got bypass on, or I've got solo on, and it's just a solid light instead of a flashing one. So that's the end of that column there. Down here we've got the crossover column. Now we discussed this earlier, show the mini spectrum handles. So that enables me, if I turn that on, I'll go to a module that has crossovers, say the dynamics module there. And you can see now I've got this little white line that I can grab these guys and pull them down. So little handles representing these controls down there. So that's the mini spectrum handles. If I turn that off, you can see they switch in and out up top there. Now host over here talks about delay compensation. If I click here, have a look at this. Now up pops this little box explaining what the current delay of the plugin is. Now if your particular host supports delay compensation, as most of them do these days, this is telling us how much delay Ozone is going to tell your host to use to handle the plugin. So first of all, it has to be enabled. So I've got it checked there. And it's telling me that my total system delay here is just over 8,000 samples. So if I want to compare that with Pro Tools, I've got that switched in there, switched here, and there it is down there, exactly the delay that the plugin is telling me. So I'm wondering why it's as big as 8,000. And I think it's because of the maximizer here. And yeah, it's because we're using some of these sample heavy processors. So you can keep an eye on that delay compensation amount there. As I turn off the intersample detection, drops down into the 7,000s now, but most of it I think is going to be coming from this IRC here. So if I switch to a different IRC, the previous IRC2 model drops right down to the 3,000s, and this one here, the original IRC, drops right down to 1000. So you can see that these later algorithms really require more processing time to do their thing, but that's fine if it's all totally catered for inside your host. Over here we've got low latency RTAS processing, and that's only obviously relevant in an RTAS system such as Pro Tools, as this one is, and that just allows the system to lower the latency where possible in exchange for sucking out more processing power. So again, it's that standard challenge you've got. Lower latency equals higher CPU usage and vice versa. Now this view buffers option here lets us see the buffers that are being used by the system in relation to your system, just to compare and make sure everything's going okay. In Pro Tools, this is a fairly self-explanatory thing, and I'll clear what's there now and start it again, and it's going to do a little test there and immediately throw out a whole heap of numbers, which are all 1024, telling me that that's my Pro Tools buffer. If I go into my playback engine and check that, 1024 certainly is. So if I change that down to 256 now, let's wait for that to take for a second. Okay, I'll go to options again. I'll go to buffers. I will clear that out and now have another look, and a whole bunch of 256s pop up. This is not going to be a problem in Pro Tools generally because all that stuff's kind of looked after pretty well. So I'll go back to where I was. I'll go to 512. Meet you in the middle. Wait for that to take. Okay. Now over there, host sync, this is just going to bring up a list of information that Ozone has gained from the host, in this case Pro Tools. So these are all the things that it's got out of Pro Tools. It's more of a diagnostic thing, really. Haven't got a problem with any of that. Out we go. Now over here we've got the history depth. So history, I suppose in some programs you would call this the undo buffer. So the amount of undos you've got, 100 there, but that's switchable between 500, unlimited. So unlimited obviously is based on your RAM, but I prefer to keep that more in check. So 100 is fine for me. Keyboard support refers to certain functions that we can do with the keyboard to get around the interface. So if I bump this up to say full keyboard support, now as I was showing before, I can click on that, but I can now use my enter key on my keypad to click on that. I can now tab through things with the tab key, maybe go up and down with the up and down arrows there to move options, that kind of thing. So just enables keyboard support around the GUI if that's what you want to do. I'll leave it on the default minimal, which is fine by me. Over here, solo the side channels in mono. If you recall back in our MS tutorial, this was the option that allowed us to, when listening to the side channels in MS, which normally sounds horrible and totally out of phase, this is just an option for us to monitor that in mono when we're soloing and having a listen. So it's purely just a monitoring thing when we're soloing, whether we want to have it in a coherent mono or this very wide out of phased sound, which can be annoying to listen to. Now over here, this is all just to do with the authorization. At the moment, I'm using Ozone 5, but from the next movie onwards, we're going to move to Ozone 5 Advanced. So over here, when you first get the program and you're not authorized, you can choose which one of those two you want to demo. So that's irrelevant for me now because I'm authorized with Ozone 5. This is the standard online update thing we're getting in lots of programs now. So it'll check each week for an update, or I can force a check now. So currently we're on 5.02. I can check now and nope, no updates available, it says. I'm on the latest version. And then down here we can either remove the existing authorization, say if we're moving to another computer, or more information which will open a help file just to do with authorizing and making sure we know what we're doing, giving us a bit more info there. So that's the end of the general options, and I'll see you in the next movie when we move on to some of the more advanced functions that are in Ozone 5 Advanced. Welcome back, and now we've moved on to the advanced version of Ozone. And initially, the only way of knowing you're on the advanced version is to see it written there in big letters. But also many of the modules have been upgraded and enhanced with more features, which we're going to go through soon. But first, let's have a look at the marquee features of the advanced version. These are the big features that sell it. Now, a very easy one to show quickly is that as well as the main Ozone plugin you can see in front of you now, which includes everything that Ozone does, the individual components have also been broken off into standalone plugins. So for instance, I'll just grab on any track here, go into my plugin list, and for instance, the EQ now, in there is the normal iZotope Ozone 5 you can see there, but directly underneath that, iZotope 5 Equalizer. So it's just the equalizer module. If I pull that up now, you can see just the equalizer module without any of the other fat on there. So this allows us to use the Great Ozone plugins as standalone modules in our mixes or even in mastering, where we could string them together as individual plugins if we so chose. So just a quick look at some of the other ones. We head into Dynamics. There's the full Ozone there, but we've also got the Dynamics module standalone and the Maximizer standalone. So multiband dynamics. So everything that we showed before, but just the module on its own. So we'll get out of there. I'll go and find my main Ozone again, which is down here. So that's the individual plugins. Not much more we need to say about that. The next major feature of Ozone is this thing called the meter bridge. Now we've already seen a whole host of metering options in Ozone, such as the main meters here, and in the stereo imaging module, we saw a bunch of phase-based meters here that gave us information of what's going on. Well, prepare to be dazzled. That stuff's small town compared to this. So if I click on meter bridge now, up comes this large window with 4 individual meters in it. Now I'll just play some music through. This is a mix that I've just thrown together from material I found on my drive, so don't judge too harshly. So you can see now all 4 of these meters dancing around, looking pretty nice. But what's very cool about this is how customizable this actually is. So that's the default now with the 4 meters going. Now down here on the left, you can see that I've got show hide buttons for each of the 4 graphs. So we've got the spectrogram, which is this one up here. We have the spectrum, which is this one here. The stereo, which is that one there. And of course the levels down here. Now with all 4, as they show at the moment, I'm free to resize them this way. So I can grab any of these vertical or horizontal bars and move things around. And you can see more information jumps into view as the screen gets bigger. Of course, I'm free to hit the zoom button here and take up the entire screen. Zoom down here, that gets larger. So very intelligent ways of scaling themselves. But I've also got these show and hide buttons here. So if I want to get rid of, say, the spectrogram here altogether, then the spectrum says thanks very much and it steals this vertical space. Same over here. If I want to get rid of the left-right stereo meters, now this guy takes all the space to himself. If I get rid of that, then he can have the whole thing to himself and so on. So let's put them all back in. But better than that, there's a whole host of options that each one has, and you can access the options by soloing that set of meters with its own button here. So you can see in the corners, each one's got its own button here that makes it take over. So for instance, if the spectrogram wanted to take over, I would hit there, and now I've got a whole bunch of controls here. I can hit options and a whole bunch more pop up. So we'll go through some of these now. So let's play the track and we can see some information and discuss what's being shown. So what we're seeing is a very attractive and startling looking meter that is giving us lots of information of frequency up here, over time down here. So the immediate thing we hear is happening at the beginning and then it floats. So if I hit stop now, that's the echoes fading out from the track and it's over time. Start again. So we can see by the density of this how thick the bottom end is versus the top end, for instance. Now we're looking at it in a 3D view at the moment. Let's hit 2D and much more boring by comparison, but still a very useful little graph. So we'll go back to 3D. Now we can orient the 3D any way we like. So front high is what we're looking at now. It's front low. The way it falls away. Diagonal. Side high. Side low. Stop there. Now this area down here relates to what's called the meter taps, and we'll discuss that in the next tutorial as a separate topic because that's a very cool little feature. Now under here is some options. I won't go into these in great detail because we would literally be here for hours if we went through every single option that's around the place. But we can adjust heights, zoom factor, and so on, and also certain ways of the meters responding. So we can do all that sort of thing, but rest assured there's enough power here to look after whatever you want to do. I'll close that and left it in a bit of a mess. We'll get out of there anyway. Now down here, we've got a standard spectrum that we've seen before. Now all this noise you can see dancing around here is because of all the analog plugins that are sitting on this mix generating noise, I think. So they're all sitting there bubbling away. This type of meter we're familiar with. Again, options down here. Okay, out of there. Now these are similar to the ones that we saw already in the stereo imager module, but obviously a larger version. But again, options down here. So again, the polar L and the polar S that we saw before, and the Lysages. Now this one down here is probably the most exciting one in terms of new information being brought to the table, because this is more than just your standard meter, and iZotope have been really cool here in developing a very powerful loudness meter here. Loudness is a very big topic at the moment because of obviously the ongoing loudness wars with CDs, but even the phenomenon that television people have been angry at for years and years, where you might be watching a movie and suddenly the ads cut in and the ads are blaringly loud, and yet everybody is still sitting under digital zero. So there was this stupid argument that because technically you weren't exceeding peaks, everyone was at the same volume, when of course we all know that loudness is much, much more than peaks, and in fact it's not really peaks at all. So all these systems have been developed now to measure loudness throughout Europe and the US, but as usual there's all these different standards and various broadcasters adhere to different ones and so on. So the meter here is very powerful in that you can measure loudness from here. That's one of the standards there, but if that's not the one we want, we can come into here and choose different standards, and there's no point going through all these. They're all based on the same type of concept, but they all have different thresholds and weightings and so on. But iZotope's got a whole heap of them covered, as well as the K system, which is the system developed by renowned mastering engineer Bob Katz, who was also fed up with loudness issues and decided to develop a way to measure it accurately between material. So if we click on the K system here, that opens up some other options over here that we can click on. And then you've got your standard peak and RMS meters there. So again, we won't go into this in any more detail than that because we'd be getting overly technical, and there's plenty of information about this sort of stuff out there on the interwebs. So there's the 4 meters. What I do like about this meter bridge though is that this is a standalone window that you can pick up and move around. So if you've got a system that has a second monitor, for instance, you could pin this onto your second monitor and just leave it there as an ongoing meter that you can be glancing at anytime you're working. So that's certainly the way I use it. Drag it off to the side to your second screen and have it sitting there. So that's the meter bridge, and next up we're going to talk about the meter tap plugin that comes with Ozone 5 Advanced and how powerful that is. See you there. So now that we've had a look at the meter bridge, we're now going to look at a cool feature that lives within one of the meters in the meter bridge, and that's the meter taps. Now check this out. I'll open up the meter bridge again, and I'll now focus on the spectrogram up here. And that enables us to access these 2 pop-ups at the bottom, the options which we've had a quick look at, and now this one, which is the focus of this tutorial, the meter taps. Now I'll click in here and you'll see that there's 8 slots here, and the first one's taken with the main output, and we've already had a little look at that. I'll play now and you'll see again. So we get this nice cloud-based display of the frequency up here versus time down here. And we saw there was various ways of alternating and changing the perspective of this display, but we'll leave it like that for now. So as you can see, we've got a nice green sort of cloud display here, and we can click on the color button here and change that to anything we want, but let's just leave it at green for now. Now what the meter taps enable us to do is use this meter to show us what it shows us on separate parts of our mix, as well as just the main output section. So we can now put that over individual tracks or individual groups in our mix and have them show up as different colors to compare and contrast with what we've got. So let's have a look at this. At the moment, we're just seeing the entire mix. We've got it over the main output. Close that off, get rid of that for now. And I'll go into my mixer here, and I've got a drum group set up down here. So there's the drum auxiliary. All the drums culminate there. So I'll go to multi-channel here, other iZotope meter tap. So this is a separate plugin which gets installed with the Ozone 5 Advanced package. So at the moment it's defaulted to this thing saying meter tap 4. It's only because I've been playing with it a little bit before this, so up to number 4. I'll click on that, change its name to drums. Now we'll get out of here, go back to our main Ozone 5 at the other end, over our master, go into meter bridge again. And when I click on this, it'll pop up here. We've now got a second option, drums, which is being created. So now we've got drums, which is going to be shown, and that's going to show up as a pink color. So let's play now. So now we've got the green cloud and the pink cloud. So if I don't show the main one, we can just look at our drums. So that's just the spectrogram for the drums. Now on my mixer here, I'm going to solo just the bass drums in this track. So there's just the two kicks I've got going. And you can see the different frequency response there. See that every second one seems to be a little bit stronger up here in the low mids, pokes out more. So one of them's playing 4 on the floor, the other one's only playing on the 2 and the 4. And you can see the difference there. Or a couple of snares. So you can see where the focus of the frequency content is for that as well. Put the main mix back in down here. Now I'll turn off the pink ones, or the purple ones. And you can see now where the kicks are. You can see every beat, this kick down the bottom there. There's one travelling away. So eventually you get used to being able to read this and you can make judgment calls on what's going on in your mix from what you see. So let's take this a little step further. I'll close that off again, get rid of that. I've also got a group set up for keyboards somewhere. There it is, A keys. So I'll come down here, go to Other, iZotope meter tap on the keys, click on there. Type keys. I've also got another one down here over the entire vocal mix. So again there, iZotope meter tap. Okay, vocals. So now we can open our main master plugin again. We go to meter bridge. And on this third slot, I can say keys. Fourth slot, I can say vocals. Now we've got 4 distinct colors there, which is cool. I'll turn off the main one so we don't double up on everything. So now this is pretty much the entire mix. We've got drums, keys and vocals. There's no effects being looked after here, but just the core tracks. So apart from the eye candy that provides us, it does give us some interesting feedback. Look at these keyboards that are going all the way up to the high frequencies. Like a little stiff bar there. So now that enables us to turn things off. We can just examine the keys there. Just look at the vocals. And it's interesting to see how much space your vocals take up, isn't it? That's just vocals. Vocals and keys. Might give us some indications of some areas we may want to EQ the keys to let the vocals poke out a bit more, perhaps. Okay, let's stop for a second. I'll put those 3 back in. Now this little focus area here enables us to maintain the color for a specific tap in this case, and the other 2 go into a kind of a grey, black and whitey sort of look, so the colored one stands out more. So let's have a look at that. At the moment we've got 3 going, as you can see. If I want to just focus on the drums, I can click there, and so our pink stands out, but the others go to a grey colour. And same on the others. Unfocus that. Here we go. And that one. And of course all these changes over here will still affect this en masse. Interesting. So you can really check the bottom end of your mix now through here. And then anytime we want, we can freeze just to examine a beat. On a downbeat there, so we can see our kick poking up. So that's a pretty cool feature, and that's called meter taps in Ozone 5 Advanced. and I'll see you in the next movie. And now we're going to run through all the small features that are exclusive to the advanced edition of Ozone compared to the basic version. So we'll start with the EQ here, and as well as the analog and digital modes that we have in the plain version of Ozone. Inside digital here now, there's a little pop-up, and we can choose between surgical mode being on or off. Now, surgical mode allows the equalizer to be incredibly accurate and make very, very precise cuts and boosts. And if I switch it on and off now, you can see the shape of the curve here changes a little bit, but that only tells some of the story. The other options here are for minimum phase, linear phase, and mixed phase. Now, minimum phase is more of a response similar to how an analog EQ would work. Linear phase is exclusively available only on digital equalizers because it relies on there being a delay in the machine, so you can't do that in the analog domain. And that's where certain frequencies in the EQ are held back, so the group delay of the entire unit is equal. So that creates a linear phase response, which is particularly accurate and useful for certain things. Other times you might want an analog response for a certain familiar sound. Now the other option here is to have a mixed phase response. If I click that on now, you can see this little section down here lights up. So on and off. And that allows us on a band by band basis to alter the phase of each band. So at the moment you're defaulting to 0, but I can go to -1 or up to +1. And that allows me to alter the phase response on a per band basis, which is quite a powerful feature, not one I've actually seen before on other EQs. So that's the EQ. We'll move on now to the reverb. Now, most notable here in the reverb is that you've got 3 more styles. So previously we had room, plate and hall. Now we've got the theatre, cathedral and arena modes thrown in there as well. So these are the convolution impulses that we discussed at the time. We've also got now an early reflections mode here, which allows us to decrease the amount of early reflections in the mix. Just another way of tailoring the response of the reverb to control our perception of depth at the front of the reverb before the actual tails, which are handled by the decay controls. Also down here on the advanced version is the cross-mix control, and that blends the response of the left and the right channels into each other by a percentage that we can set here to create a more blended sort of reverb as opposed to a more discrete one. Next up, the harmonic exciter. And down here, there's now extra models available in our rack of excitement templates. So now we've got the triode and the dual triode models as well. And these are based on the 12AX7 tubes. The triode model using half of the tube and the dual triode model using the entire tube to run its distortion. Moving up to dynamics now. And I'll get out of this show all view that I'm in at the moment and go back to a specific channel there. And if we move over here to this area there, we can see we've got now a thing called the detection filter. And if I click there, this is showing how the side chain in the compressor detects the sound. So this is not to do with multi-band and having your signal broken up into 2, 3 or 4 bands. This is showing us what parts of our signal are going to make the compressor react. So let's just dumb this down to a single band compressor. So I'll open up the dynamics options and go to a single band unit there, or a single band dynamics module, I should say, not compressor necessarily, because we've got a limiter and a gate in there as well. So at the moment, the filter says none, which means that it's going to respond to all input equally. So if, for instance, you've got a massive bass drum in your track, it's going to respond to that and push the entire track down, perhaps not to your liking. So you can change the filter to a high pass filter there now. So now if I grab this and bring it down like that, you can see the bottom end is rolling off. Now this has nothing to do with EQing the signal, as I said. This is just telling us what the plugin is going to respond to in the music that you've got there. So if I've got a track now with a massive bass drum going over the top, the plugin is not going to respond to that because I've got it rolling off at around 370 here and then rolling down. So that bass drum down here is going to be hitting, and the dynamics are not going to jump to that. They're going to be listening to what's going on up here in this area in that sense. So there's my break-off point, 370, and at the moment it's got a slope of 6 decibels per octave. So I can tighten that up and you can see the result there. It falls over the edge a lot quicker when you get up to 24 decibels or indeed 48 decibels per octave. So the rule about roll-offs generally is that you want to have it as shallow as you can to achieve your goals, but sometimes you're going to need that really tight fall off if you've got something down here that you're trying to avoid. So anyway, that's the high pass variant of that. Then there's a tilt variant there, which is going to react a certain way. And you can adjust the kind of shape of the tilt there with the amount. So there's your two choices. And with those two, you can certainly get the processor to respond to the part of your audio that you want it to. We also have the option here to solo the curve, which is useful if you're trying to tune it to get something out of the way. So I'll play some track. Now I'll move it to the high pass there. So if I solo that now, so you can hear, if I'm trying to avoid that bass drum that's in there, so you can hear, so you hear that bass drum kicking through. Now let's try and make it so it doesn't respond to that. So we're only getting the upper harmonics of that bass drum now. So that way we can tune this filter to respond exactly how we want. So that's the detection filter. Another addition down here, there was two options for choosing how the response of the dynamics module works on its threshold. And our options were peak and RMS. And there's peak, there's RMS. But now in Ozone 5 Advanced, we have the option of envelope mode, which is a shortened version for true envelope. And true envelope detection is similar to RMS detection, but it produces an even response across all frequencies, which RMS isn't able to do quite as well. So another option for how detection works, which might work better for you. Now moving over here to this part of the response, we can zoom in there, we can zoom out there. But you'll notice now we haven't got the knee control that was here, that was offering us soft and hard knee. Now we've got a continually variable control here, which obviously gives us more control. So let's zoom in right onto this break up high. That one there's the compressor break, which is under 1 to 1 at the moment, so it's going up in that direction. Just roll things back there. There we go. And can we zoom in even more on that? Not as well. Actually, I'll do it on the... There we go. Now you can see I can use these brackets here to open up the knee. Now this is the limiter I'm working on there, so you can see it up there as I move it. I'm softening the knee of that limiter continually variable. So from an absolute hard knee to a very, very slight and soft knee. Let's zoom out and do the same thing down on the compressor one, which is down there. And so I can click that soft knee and hard knee. Though the ratio is very low, I'll make it much tighter. Soft knee, hard knee. Now in the dynamics options here, we've also got now a look ahead control. So we can grow that number now to allow better processing of transients, but at the expense of increasing the latency of the plugin naturally, because we're delaying the processing, allowing the plugin more time to sit and think. So that's in milliseconds, and again, a trade-off between latency and a certain amount of quality. Jumping over to stereo imaging now, and we can see a new addition here is this stereoize slider. So on top of the per band widening effects that we've got here, we can get quite a pleasing stereo spread with this control as well. So let's have a listen. So we can see that's a relatively wide mix. Let's put it on there. Let's switch over to that and maybe to that. There we go. Now, if I turn the stereoizer on, get yourself in the middle of your speakers or headphones if you've got them on, obviously, and let's widen. So you can hear it jump out, and you can clearly see it on the meter there. That's bringing it in, throwing it right out there. So that's the default position, 7. But it is having a negative phase effect. We can see on this red undersection here. If I bring it back into the default, it's not quite as dramatic down there as it was before. Turn that off entirely, and a lot of the antiphases stop there. In fact, just about all of it has. So I'll turn it back on. So you can hear things get wider, but there is that trade-off in terms of anti-phase. If you do have the Ozone 5 advanced version, well then you have got the separate plugin that you could use, and you could put this over buses, for instance. So maybe keyboards or guitars could benefit from this sort of widening, but not so much the drums, for instance. Moving over to the maximizer now, and one really cool feature of the advanced version of the maximizer is this transient recovery control here. And you might recall back when we covered the maximizer, I was talking about how these more modern versions of limiters have got all these great controls in them to get things louder but less distorted. And this is another example of that, transient recovery, which will shape the transients that are coming in, like on sharp things such as, drums, percussive instruments and so on, and allow them to still kind of poke through or still give us the sense that they're poking through, but yet boost loudness at the same time. So let's see if we can get a demo happening that shows that. So we're pretty loud now anyway, in terms of compression. I'll turn that on. Have a little look down here at the latency, and you can see it changing as I switch certain functions on and off. And it's moving around as we go, so look at that. That's off, that's on. Now, let's push it. Okay, there's no sensible reason why I should be limiting that much, but for the sake of the exercise. Listen to the kick drum and maybe those hand claps. Now the chorus kicks in. It's quite subtle on this particular track, but I have heard it to great effect on some other material. So again, like all the stuff in here, depends on your material, but a cool feature to have. So now we've got these controls mixed with all these different modes. So the transient recovery works with all three IRCs. Doesn't work in the hard and soft modes here for reasons we discussed back in the maximizer tutorial, but all these variations we've got now, particularly 2 and 3, which sound excellent with their strong clipping modes, if that's the sort of hard and fast sound that you're going for with modern pop music. Otherwise, you can make them very gentle if you're doing music that requires a much softer touch. So aside from the meter bridge that of course we have discussed, the meter taps function within the meter bridge, and the ability to have all these modules operate as standalone plugins, we've just run through all the little subtle advantages of Ozone 5 Advanced over the basic version. So that will see us out. I hope you got something positive out of this tutorial, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.